The Duke of Hale-wick said the cruelest thing Lady Verity Dacre had ever heard in a room where she was not supposed to exist. "I'd rather lose everything than marry her." The word slipped beneath the half-closed drawing-room door at Dacre House and found Verity where she stood in the shadowed passage, one gloved hand resting on the cool brass handle, the other holding a folded calling card she had not yet gathered the courage to deliver. For one suspended moment, London seemed to forget its noise beyond the tall windows. The wheels on Brook Street grew distant. The footman at the stair did not move. Even the gilt clock on the mantel inside the room appeared to pause between 1 second and the next, as though time itself wished to spare her the echo. But the echo came. Her. Not Lady Verity. Not Miss Dacre, as careless people sometimes called her when they wished to diminish the daughter of a dead earl. Not even that unfortunate young woman. Her. A burden. A trap. A woman so undesirable that a duke would prefer ruin to her hand. Inside the drawing-room, Mr. Gideon Vale, solicitor to the House of Hale-wick, cleared his throat with the soft distress of a man who had seen fortunes tremble over ink and seals. "Your Grace, I must remind you that the clause concerns Cresmere Hall, not merely a sum of money." His voice was low, precise, and strained. The late Duchess's maternal trust was written in terms that leave very little room for interpretation. If the proposed alliance is refused before Friday, the trustees may pass control of Cresmere to the Vos Dacre line. A chair scraped. Verity could imagine the man who had made it move, though she had seen him only once before, across a crowded music-hall 2 seasons earlier. His Grace Adrian Aylesbury, Duke of Hale-wick, had been taller than the men around him and colder than the chandeliers above them, all black evening coat, silver waistcoat, and a face too disciplined to be called handsome by anyone who valued warmth. Society spoke of his influence the way it spoke of winter roads, with caution and respect. He owned estates, controlled borough interests, advised men who advised ministers, and could close a drawing-room around a person with a single look. Now that look, she suspected, was turned like a blade upon the papers laid out before him. "Then the trustees may pass it," he said. "Let the Vosses choke on the old stones if they are so hungry for them." "Adrian," came Lady Prunella Dacre's voice, smooth as cream poured over poison, "no one wishes for vulgarity. We are discussing family honor." Verity's fingers tightened around the calling card. Family honor, in Lady Prunella's mouth, meant obedience from anyone too poor to resist her. For 3 years, since Verity's father's death had left little but debts, mourning gowns, and a title that passed to a distant cousin, Lady Prunella had spoken of honor whenever she meant sacrifice. Verity had learned to lower her eyes at the proper time, to mend lace before anyone noticed the fray, to smile when seated near the fire screen instead of the guest of rank, and to accept that a poor relation might remain in a house only so long as she proved useful without becoming visible. But no one had warned her she had become useful enough to be offered to a duke. "Family honor," the duke repeated. His voice was controlled, but something hard moved beneath it. "Do not dress coercion in silk, Lady Prunella. I received a letter. I read the terms. I know a trap when it is set before me." Verity stopped breathing. A letter. She had written no letter to him. She had never addressed him at all. "The young lady has been guided by those who understand her position," Lady Prunella replied. "A girl without fortune must be practical." "Practical," he said, and the word carried such contempt that Verity felt it against her skin. "Was that what she called it when she placed herself in the path of my mother's will? Practical." Mr. Vale spoke again, softer now. "Your Grace, I cannot attest to Lady Verity's intention. I can only attest to the clause, the prior correspondence, and the urgency. Friday is the final day by which a formal offer may prevent a challenge. Then let Friday come." Silence fell inside the room. Verity knew its shape. It was the silence that followed a dropped teacup, an insult too elegant to name, a young woman entering a ballroom in a gown everyone knew had been turned twice. She had lived in such silences for years. Yet this one had the power to decide where she might sleep next week, whether she would remain respectable, whether every woman in London would soon whisper that Lady Verity Dacre had failed to secure even a coerced proposal. She should have stepped away. She should have returned to the back staircase, folded herself into the small chamber allotted to her beneath the eaves, and pretended she had heard nothing. Instead, she remained there, still as a portrait no one admired. If Lady Verity is innocent of ambition, Lady Prunella said, she will make an obedient wife. If she is ambitious, she will make a useful one. The Duke laughed once, without amusement. How generous of you to make her faults so versatile. Heat rose behind Verity's eyes, sharp and humiliating. She swallowed it back. Tears were a language Lady Prunella understood too well. I will not marry a woman who bargains for a duchy through hidden clauses and desperate relatives, the Duke said. I will not have Cresme used as bait, nor my name fastened to a stranger's scheme. Tell Lady Verity Dacre this, if she is waiting for my answer. Another pause. Then the blow landed, quieter than before and far worse. She shall have no answer from me. Verity's fingers loosened on the calling card. It slipped from her hand and landed face down on the runner without a sound. She bent to retrieve it because bending gave her something to do besides break. When she straightened, a reflection stared back from the darkened glass of a framed landscape opposite the door. Pale face. Brown hair pinned simply because curls required a maid with time to spare. Grey eyes too steady for the injury beneath them. A gown of faded blue silk altered so carefully that only another poor woman would know how long it had been made to serve. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was. A woman not worth losing everything for. The drawing-room door opened so abruptly that she had no time to retreat. Lady Prunella stepped into the passage, her black lace cap trembling slightly, though her smile did not. She was a handsome widow of 45, with the firm chin of a person who mistook control for virtue. Her eyes moved from Verity's face to the fallen calling card in her hand. My dear child, she said, one should not linger near closed doors. Verity curtsied because manners, once trained into the bones, survived even shock. I was bringing your card case. You left it in the morning room. The lie was poor. They both knew it. Lady Prunella's gaze sharpened. From inside the drawing-room came Mr. Vale's murmur and the Duke's lower answer, already turned away from the woman he had refused. Lady Prunella reached for Verity's wrist and drew her farther down the passage, away from the door. The grip was not violent. It would leave no bruise a physician could condemn, no mark a magistrate would care to see. It was only firm enough to remind Verity that dependence had a hand, and that hand could close whenever it wished. You will not repeat what you heard, Lady Prunella said. I heard enough to know there has been a mistake. There has been an opportunity. Not for me. The older woman's smile thinned. Do not be childish. Women in your position do not reject deliverance because it arrives without poetry. Verity looked down. One of the pearl buttons on her glove had caught against Lady Prunella's ring. As the widow tightened her grasp, the kid leather gave way with a tiny, tearing sound. It was absurd that such a small sound should hurt after what she had heard through the door. Yet it did. The glove had been her mother's once, carefully cleaned and kept wrapped in tissue. Verity had worn it only on evenings when she needed to remember she had belonged to someone who loved her without calculation. Now the seam near the wrist had opened, and one pearl button hung loose by a thread. Lady Prunella released her and glanced at the tear with irritation, as if the glove had been rude enough to accuse her. You are overwrought. Verity folded her injured hand against her skirt. No, Her voice surprised her by remaining calm. I am informed. The widow's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the softness dropped away, and Verity saw the fear beneath the cruelty. Not fear of Verity, perhaps. Fear that a plan had been heard before it had finished closing. You will go upstairs, Lady Prunella said. You will remain there until I send for you. You will speak to no one, write to no one, and imagine nothing beyond what is arranged for your good. Verity looked once toward the drawing-room. The Duke of Hale-wick had not come into the passage. Of course he had not. Men like him pronounce judgment from polished rooms and let others carry the sentence. She curtsied again, because dignity was the last possession no trustee could redirect and no guardian could seize. As you wish. She walked away without haste. At the turn of the staircase, where no one below could see her face, she stopped and opened her hand. The torn glove lay across her palm, the pearl button trembling on its final thread. She should have felt only shame. Instead, beneath the shame, something clear and cold began to form. If His Grace believed she had begged for him, he would learn otherwise. If Lady Prunella believed silence could be arranged as neatly as a seating chart, she had forgotten that even a quiet woman possessed a hand with which to write. Verity climbed the narrow stairs to the small room beneath the roof, closed the door, and placed the glove on the little desk by the window. Then she took out a sheet of paper, dipped her pen, and wrote the first line before courage could desert her. Your Grace, I release you from any obligation you believe I sought. By the time the ink dried on the first line, Lady Verity Dacre had learned how difficult it was to refuse a man who had already rejected her. The little room beneath the roof held barely enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a cracked-looking glass, and the writing desk Lady Prunella had once called too fine for a dependent relation, though it had belonged to Verity's mother before any Dacre debt had required charity. The afternoon light came thinly through the sloped window, grey with London soot, and fell across the torn pearl-button glove lying beside the paper. Verity had removed both gloves now. One lay whole and useless. The other gaped at the wrist where the leather had split, its loose pearl trembling whenever her sleeve brushed the desk. She should have changed. She should have gone down when summoned. She should have sat quietly until other people decided whether she was to be saved, sold, or shamed. Instead, she dipped the pen again and continued. I have never written to solicit your hand, your title, your estate, or your fortune. Whatever letter has been shown to you did not come from me. I would rather remain poor than enter a marriage where my husband believes me capable of bargaining for him like a parcel of land. Her hand shook only once, on the word husband. She crossed nothing out. A woman who possessed so little could not afford to make her truth look uncertain. From below came the muted rhythm of Dacre House preparing for evening calls. Doors opened and closed. A maid hurried along the passage with warmed linen. Somewhere, Lady Prunella's voice rose in its usual silken correction, soft enough to pass for refinement and sharp enough to leave marks no one else could see. Verity sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with the smallest wafer she had left in her workbox. She owned no personal seal. That, too, felt suddenly important. A letter without a crest had only its handwriting to defend it. A light knock sounded. Verity turned the letter over and slipped it beneath a square of mending linen. Come in. Milly entered with a coal scuttle balanced against one hip, though there was almost no coal in it. She was 16, perhaps 17, with anxious brown eyes and cuffs too large for her wrists. In a grand house, a girl like Milly should have been invisible except when needed. In Dacre House, invisibility was not enough. Lady Prunella noticed fear the way a cat noticed thread. Mrs. Pike said you were to have the last of the coal, my lady, Milly whispered. Only a little, but it's cold under the roof. Verity smiled despite herself. Then Mrs. Pike is kinder than she admits. Milly glanced toward the desk. Servants saw everything, because no one with rank believed they had eyes. Is that for his grace? Verity stilled. What makes you ask? Her ladyship said no letters were to leave the house from this floor. The girl's voice dropped lower. She told Thomas at the hall that if anyone carried one, they would be turned off without a character. Verity felt the words as Lady Prunella had intended them. A servant dismissed without a character might starve politely while respectable households refused the door. Did she say your name? Not mine, my lady. But she looked at me when she said it. Milly tried to smile and failed. I'm quick with stares, that's all. Verity looked at the folded letter beneath the linen. There was a kind of cruelty in discovering that even truth required someone poorer to risk herself carrying it. Then you must not take it. But if it would help you. No, the word came firmer than Verity expected. No, Milly. I will not buy my freedom with your place. The girl's eyes filled with something like gratitude, which made Verity turn away before she softened too much. She went to the glove and began working the loose pearl free from its thread, not because it needed to be done at once, but because her hands required employment. There may be another way. Does Mr. Vale's clerk still come for the copied papers before dinner? Milly nodded. A boy from Lincoln's Inn. He waits at the tradesman's door and complains if cook makes him stand near the onions. Good. If a folded paper were placed inside the blue account book that must be returned to Mr. Vale, the clerk would not know who placed it there. Milly's mouth parted. My lady, that's still a risk. For me, yes. Not for you. I shall take the account book down myself. The courage of that sounded finer than it felt. Verity was not allowed near the business room unless sent for. Poor relations were useful in nurseries, music rooms, and sick rooms. They were not expected to walk willingly toward documents that governed their fate. Milly drew a breath to answer, but the door opened without a knock. Lady Prunella stood there, her pale green gown arranged with the precision of a battle flag. Her eyes moved from Milly to the coal scuttle, then to the desk. How industrious! One might almost think this a respectable household. Milly dipped into a quick curtsy and nearly struck the scuttle against the bed frame. Beg pardon, my lady. Do you? Lady Prunella stepped inside. Because apology is more convincing before the error, not after. Lady Verity has no need of visitors whispering under the eaves. She brought coal, Verity said. At Mrs. Pike's instruction. And no doubt Mrs. Pike will be touched by your defense of her authority. Lady Prunella smiled at Milly. Downstairs. Now. Milly moved too quickly. The scuttle tipped against the washstand, and a small scatter of coal dust spilled over the floorboards and the hem of Lady Prunella's gown. The sound was tiny. The consequence arrived before it finished. Clumsy girl, Lady Prunella said, each word calm enough for a parlour. I have dismissed servants for less. Milly went white. I'm sorry, my lady. I didn't mean to. That is the common tragedy of your class. You so rarely mean to be useless. Verity rose. She did not raise her voice. The room was too small for raised voices, and Lady Prunella liked nothing better than to call dignity hysteria. It was my fault. I asked her to put the scuttle there, and I moved the washstand this morning to catch the light. I should have warned her. Lady Prunella turned slowly. How generous. No. Accurate. Silence pressed against the sloped walls. Milly stared at the floor as though she could disappear into it. Lady Prunella's gaze rested on Verity with displeasure sharpened by interest. You grow bold after overhearing what did not concern you. My future concerned me. Your future, Lady Prunella said, is precisely what I have been preserving. Verity folded her hand so the torn glove on the desk would not draw her eyes. Then perhaps it should be preserved with less damage. The widow's expression changed only a fraction, but Verity saw it. A flash of warning. A note would be searched for now. A maid would be watched. A door would be locked if needed. Clean this, Lady Prunella said to Milly. Then return below and tell Mrs. Pike that Lady Verity has requested no further attendance tonight. She is not to be disturbed, and she is not to send messages. Milly curtsied again, trembling. Verity could do nothing more without making the girl a target twice over. When Lady Prunella left, she took the air of the room with her. Milly knelt to gather the coal dust with a rag, but Verity touched her shoulder lightly. Leave it. I truly did move the washstand. You shouldn't have said that for me. I have been accused of worse today. Milly looked up. Then let me help. Verity considered the door, the desk, the thin line of the hidden letter beneath the mending cloth. Not by carrying it. She lifted the blue account book from the shelf near the bed, the one Lady Prunella had sent up weeks earlier for Verity to copy figures from charitable subscriptions. Its spine was cracked, its pages dull with columns of names, coal allotments, parish gifts, and small economies made in other people's hunger. Verity opened it near the center, slid the letter beneath a page of copied figures, and closed the cover. You will tell Mrs. Pike I asked whether the account book must be returned to Mr. Vale tonight. Nothing more. If she sends the clerk up, I will give it to him myself. If she sends a footman, the book will still go from my hand, not yours. Milly nodded, though fear had not left her face. And if her ladyship asks? Then you know nothing. Verity gave her a faint smile. That is the one privilege granted to the powerless. People believe they know nothing until it is too late. Half an hour later, the blue account book left Dacre House in the damp hands of a clerk who complained about onions, rain, and the weight of other men's papers. Verity watched from the landing above the service stairs until the back door closed. She did not feel triumphant. She felt exposed. By evening, across London in a panelled room that smelled of leather, sealing wax, an extinguished fire, Adrian Ellsbury broke the wafer on a plain folded letter he had not expected to receive. Mr. Vale stood by the desk with the blue account book open before him. It was found between the charity pages, Your Grace. I thought it best you see it before I enter anything into the file. Adrian read the letter once. Then again. His face did not change, but his hand stilled over the final line. I release you from any obligation you believe I sought. He reached for the earlier correspondence, the one that had made him furious enough to condemn a woman through a door. The first letter was elegant, eager, and coy in all the wrong places. Its loops were softer, its pressure uneven, its phrases arranged to flatter his vanity and threaten his inheritance in the same breath. Verity's letter was not flattering. It was not coy. Its strokes were clean, restrained, and proud, with a slight rightward slant that grew firmer whenever she denied wanting what everyone accused her of seeking. Adrian placed the 2 pages side by side. For the first time that day, certainty failed him. These were not written by the same hand, he said. Mr. Vale removed his spectacles, polished them, and did not pretend surprise. No, Your Grace. I rather feared they were not. Adrian looked toward the dark window, where London reflected him back as a hard outline against lamplight. A poor relation in a faded gown had heard him call her a trap, then answered not with pleading, but release. Something uncomfortable moved beneath his ribs. Not tenderness. Not yet. Shame, perhaps. And suspicion. Find out who had access to the first letter, he said. Quietly. Mr. Vale bowed. And Lady Verity. Adrian looked down at her name, written in her own hand, steady as a door closing. No one is to trouble her because of this. His voice lowered. Especially not Lady Prunella Dacre. The following evening, Lady Verity Dacre entered Lady Amherst's assembly rooms on Upper Brook Street with a glove mended so neatly that only a cruel eye would know where to look. London had already begun to whisper. She felt it before she heard it, that slight turning of shoulders, that pause in conversation which was too small to be called rude and too deliberate to be innocent. Candles blazed in crystal branches along the mirrored walls. Silk skirts brushed polished floorboards. Gentlemen bowed over hands they intended to forget by morning. Above the musicians' platform, garlands of pale ribbon trembled whenever the doors opened to admit another guest and another draught of April air. It was a respectable gathering, which meant every unkindness would be done with excellent posture. Lady Prunella Dacre had insisted they attend. Absence breeds confession, she had said while fastening a jet brooch at her throat. If people expect shame, we must disappoint them. Verity had understood the command beneath the advice. She was to appear calm, grateful, and available for whatever story her guardian wished society to believe. So she came in faded blue silk, her hair pinned without ornament, the repaired pearl button glove drawn carefully over her wrist. No one would see the tear unless someone wished to find it. Unfortunately, London was full of people who wished to find tears. Lady Verity, Lady Amherst said with a smile that offered welcome without protection. How brave of you to come. Brave. The word landed with the delicate cruelty of a pin. How kind of you to receive us, Verity replied. Lady Prunella's hand settled lightly against her back, guiding her forward with the pressure of ownership. My niece has been looking forward to an evening among friends. Friends turned their faces toward them. One matron murmured behind a fan. A young gentleman looked at Verity, then looked away too quickly, as though eye contact might attach him to the scandal. Near the refreshment table, Lady Marybelle Voss stood in a gown of ivory satin that caught every flame in the room and returned it as triumph. She was beautiful in the polished way of women who had never needed to wonder whether the world would make space for them. Her fair hair was arranged in glossy loops, and a string of pearls lay at her throat like a declaration of victory. Beside her, 2 other young ladies leaned close, hungry for whatever she might say next. Verity recognized Lady Marybelle only from a distance, but she knew the type. Every season produced one. A woman praised for gentleness because she had never been required to be kind. Lady Verity, Marybelle called, bright enough to turn nearby heads. We feared you might stay away. Verity crossed the small distance because retreat would have looked like guilt. Did you? Naturally. One hears such complicated things. Marybelle lifted her glass of orgeat. But then, complicated things do follow interesting women. A few listeners smiled. Lady Prunella's fingers tightened and then released at Verity's elbow, a warning to endure. Verity inclined her head. I have often found that what follows women is less interesting than who sends it after them. The smile on Maribel's mouth remained. Her eyes cooled. How philosophical. I do admire a woman who improves adversity into conversation. It is less expensive than improving it into jewelry. One of the gentlemen nearby gave a startled cough. Verity did not look at him. She had not intended to be clever. She had intended to survive the next hour without becoming entertainment. But Maribel's gaze sharpened, and Verity knew she had made the mistake of sounding less wounded than expected. The musicians began a country dance. Couples formed. Lady Prunella drew Verity toward the side of the room, near a tall arrangement of hothouse greenery that smelled faintly of damp leaves and soil. It was the sort of place assigned to unmarried women who had ceased to be new and had not succeeded in becoming necessary. Verity stood there and watched the room reorganize itself around power. Daughters moved toward eligible heirs. Mothers calculated. Men with debt smiled at widows with fortunes. All of society was a ledger pretending to be a party. Then Lady Maribel stepped into the open space near the refreshment table and raised her glass just high enough to seem spontaneous. Before the dancing carries us all away, she said, I feel we must drink to the marvels of the season. Conversation softened. Fans paused. Lady Immersed looked uncertain, but curiosity had already done its work. To beauty, of course, Maribel continued, glancing at her friends. To rank, when rank is deserved. To fortune, when fortune is honestly kept. And to those ingenious ladies who remind us that a woman need not possess youth, beauty, or dowry if she knows how to fasten a duchy with paper and ink. The room went quiet. Not fully. London was too practiced for that. But the sound thinned until Verity heard the faint tick of a bracelet against a glass 3 yards away. Her face did not burn at once. That would have been kinder. Instead, the insult entered her slowly, making its way through layers of training. She saw the laughter that did not dare become laughter. She saw Lady Prunella's expression harden, not in defense, but in annoyance that Maribel had struck before the older woman was ready. She saw 2 young ladies look at her glove, as if ambition might be visible at the wrist. Verity could have answered. Several sentences came to her, each sharp enough to draw blood without leaving evidence. She swallowed them. A woman accused of grasping could not afford to be seen reaching for revenge. She folded her hands, the mended glove over the uninjured one, and made herself breathe. How inventive, Lady Maribel, she said at last. I had not realized charity to the conversation required so many sacrifices of accuracy. A murmur passed through the room. Maribel's smile brightened dangerously. Accuracy? My dear Lady Verity, don't be offended. I didn't name anyone. No, Verity said. That is what makes the courage of it so modest. This time the silence became real. Maribel's cheeks colored. Lady Prunella turned sharply, already preparing to correct Verity in a voice sweet enough to hide the blow. Then the doors opened. The footman announced a name, and the room altered before the final syllable left his mouth. His Grace, the Duke of Hale-wick. Adrian Ellsbury entered alone. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Every person present seemed to remember at once that a duke's arrival could raise the value of a party or ruin its comfort. He wore black evening dress with a white cravat tied in severe lines, and the candlelight caught the dark gloss of his hair as he paused just inside the threshold. His gaze moved across the room, taking in Lady Immersed, Lady Prunella, the gathered listeners, Lady Maribel with her lifted glass, and Verity beside the greenery. He had heard enough. Verity knew it from the stillness that came over him. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. Lady Maribel recovered first. Your Grace, she said, dipping into a curtsy that displayed every inch of grace she possessed. How fortunate. We were just making a little toast. So I gathered. His voice carried without effort. I regret arriving late. It appears I nearly missed an exhibition of wit. Maribel's smile returned. I hope your Grace approves. Of wit, always. Of cowardice dressed as wit, rarely. The words landed with such precision that no one moved. Lady Immerst's fan stopped midair. Lady Prunella's lips parted. Verity's heart gave one hard beat, not of gratitude, not yet, but of shock. The man who had condemned her in private had just rebuked another woman in public. Marybelle lowered her glass a fraction. "I can't imagine your meaning." "Then I shall not burden you by asking you to carry it." Adrian turned from her as if the conversation had ended because he had decided it had. His gaze came to Verity. In it she saw something she had not seen the day before. Not warmth. Not apology. Attention. Exact, unsettling attention. He crossed the floor toward her, and the crowd parted because rank was a language everyone in the room understood. When he stopped before her, he bowed. "Lady Verity." She curtsied. "Your Grace. Will you walk with me once around the room?" The request was not quite a dance. It was safer than a dance, and in some ways more dangerous. A dance could be dismissed as courtesy. A slow turn through the assembly beside him would be read as protection. Every person present would understand that he had seen where society placed her and had chosen to move her from it. Verity felt Lady Prunella's gaze like a hand at her back again. She also felt Lady Marybelle's fury from across the room. "If my aunt permits it," Verity said. Adrian looked at Lady Prunella. It was not a request the widow could refuse without exposing too much. "Of course," Lady Prunella said. "His Grace is most considerate." Verity placed her gloved hand lightly on Adrian's offered arm. The contact was proper, brief, and devastatingly observed. They began to walk. Conversations resumed in fragments around them, but each fragment followed their progress. A countess who had ignored Verity last week inclined her head. A gentleman stepped aside too quickly. Lady Immerst smiled as if the evening had been saved by a development she would later claim to have expected. Adrian kept his pace measured, neither possessive nor reluctant. "You were struck unfairly," he said quietly. "That is common enough." "It should not be." Verity looked ahead. "Your Grace has discovered injustice very recently." He accepted that without flinching. "Yes." The answer was so plain that she nearly looked at him. "I have discovered several things recently." "How efficient." At that, something almost like regret crossed his face. They turned near a pier glass, and his gaze dropped to her hands. Verity realized too late that the repaired seam of her glove faced outward. The line of new thread showed pale against the older kid leather. His eyes rested there for 1 second too long. "Your glove," he said. She drew her hand back a little, though etiquette kept it on his sleeve. "It is mended." "It was torn yesterday." "Not a question." Verity lifted her chin. "Many things were." The words passed between them more intimately than touch. Adrian's expression tightened. For the first time, she wondered whether shame might suit him better than certainty. They completed the circuit of the room. By the time he returned her to Lady Prunella, the damage of Marybelle's toast had not vanished, but it had changed shape. Verity was no longer merely the woman mocked beside the greenery. She was the woman the Duke of Hale-wick had chosen to escort while the whole room watched. That distinction would feed London for days. Whether it would save her or ruin her more thoroughly remained to be seen. Adrian bowed again, lower than courtesy required. "Lady Verity, I would speak with you tomorrow morning, if your aunt will allow a proper call." Lady Prunella smiled too quickly. "We are honored." Verity met his eyes. She thought of the letter, the glove, the sentence behind the door, and the room that had just shifted because he chose to make it shift. "Your Grace," she said softly, "a public kindness does not erase a private cruelty." A hush seemed to find them even amid the music. Adrian did not look away. "No," he said. "But it may be the first honest thing I have done since it." Verity gave him no forgiveness. She gave him only a curtsy. Yet as he stepped back, his gaze moved once more to the mended glove, and she knew the tear had become more than a mark of shame. It had become a question he could not leave alone. Friday morning came to London with a pale sky, a damp pavement, and the particular cruelty of ordinary bells ringing over extraordinary decisions. Lady Verity Dacre had slept little. She had lain beneath the thin coverlet in the attic room while carriage wheels passed in the street below and Lady Prunella's household settled into its careful silence, each floor of Dacre House holding its own version of watchfulness. By dawn, the mended glove rested on the desk beside her mother's workbox, and Verity had chosen to wear it again. Not because it was whole. Because it was not. A flawless glove would have lied for everyone. The repaired seam told her, with every small pull at the wrist, that something had been damaged and still remained useful. Lady Prunella sent for her at 9 o'clock, dressed already in morning silk that made her look less bereaved than armoured. "His Grace has requested a call," she said, as if this were a triumph she had arranged rather than a disturbance she feared. "At St. George's, of all places. A public square. Very proper. Very theatrical." Verity fastened the last pearl button at her wrist. "Then there can be no objection." Lady Prunella's eyes narrowed. "There can be many objections, my dear. We merely choose which ones to speak aloud." The carriage ride to Hanover Square took less than 15 minutes, but it felt longer than the entire previous season. Lady Prunella sat opposite Verity, gloved hands folded over her reticule, her face composed for the world beyond the window. A maid from the household sat beside the coachman as visible propriety, and Mrs. Edgley, an elderly cousin who had been summoned in haste to serve as chaperone, dozed beside Verity with heroic indifference. London moved around them in shades of grey and brown. Footmen shook rain from cloaks. A flower girl carried a basket of violets beneath a shawl. Gentlemen crossed the street with their collars turned up, preserving their boots from mud with the seriousness other men reserved for treaties. When the carriage stopped near St. George's, Verity looked first at the church steps, then at the colonnade where the Duke of Hale-wick stood waiting. He had arrived before them. That unsettled her more than lateness would have done. Men of his rank were not required to wait for anyone, least of all a poor relation whose name had become inconvenient. He wore a dark coat against the morning damp, his hat in one hand, his posture controlled but not at ease. Mr. Vale stood several yards away with a leather case beneath his arm, close enough to satisfy business and far enough to leave conversation possible. When Adrian saw Verity descend, his gaze went at once to her face. Not to Lady Prunella. Not to the carriage. Not to the square. Her face. She wished it meant nothing. She wished even more that she had not noticed. He bowed. "Lady Verity." "Your Grace." Lady Prunella stepped forward before he could say more. "We are all curiosity. Your note was most unexpected. I meant it to be brief, not mysterious." Adrian's eyes did not leave Verity for long. "Mrs. Edgley, if you would be so kind as to remain within sight, I should like to speak with Lady Verity where no one may accuse either of us of impropriety." Mrs. Edgley opened her eyes just enough to assess the arrangement. A church behind you, a solicitor to the left, and half of London passing by. I have seen riskier conversations over tea. She settled on a bench beneath the colonnade with the serenity of a woman too old to be frightened by dukes. Lady Prunella looked displeased, but she could not object without seeming unreasonable. Adrian offered Verity his arm. She did not take it. After 1 second, he lowered it. That small acceptance did more to disarm her than any grand apology might have done. They walked a few paces beneath the shelter of the stone columns, near enough to be seen, far enough not to be heard. The square smelled of wet stone, horse leather, and early spring. Verity kept her hands clasped before her, the mended glove visible between them. Adrian noticed. "Of course he did. I received your letter," he said. "So Mr. Vale informed you?" "No. Your words informed me." She looked at him then. His face was as restrained as ever, but restraint no longer appeared effortless. There was weariness beneath it, and something darker. Shame had begun its work. "I believed a lie," he said. "That does not repair what I said, but it is the truth." Verity's throat tightened, not because he was apologizing, but because he had not tried to soften the injury first. "A lie about me?" "Yes." "A convenient one?" "Yes." "And now that it is inconvenient, your Grace has discovered doubt." His jaw moved once. "I deserve that." "I did not say it to be deserved. I said it because it is accurate." For a moment, the only sound was the passing of a carriage, its wheels hissing over damp stone. Adrian looked toward the street, then back to her. Cressmere Hall is not merely a house. It was my mother's place before it became mine to guard. The trust attached to it is old, badly worded, and surrounded by people who have waited years for weakness. If the proposed alliance is rejected by this evening, the Vos Dacre trustees may challenge my control. They may not take my title. They may not take my name. But they can drag Cressmere through litigation, freeze rents, endanger tenants, and make my mother's last refuge a prize in a public quarrel. Verity listened without interrupting. The explanation was not brief, but it was honest enough to matter. And you thought I had placed myself inside that quarrel. I thought you had been placed there willingly. There is the difference. Yes. He faced her fully now. And I am sorry. The words did not heal. They did something more dangerous. They asked to be believed. Verity looked past him to the church doors, where brides had emerged in lace and hope, where families had smiled for unions that were sometimes love and sometimes strategy. She wondered how many women had stood near those steps and been told that marriage was safety, only to discover safety had conditions. "Why am I here, Your Grace?" she asked. "Because I intend to ask for your hand." The world did not stop this time. It sharpened. A groom laughed somewhere near a carriage. A bell rang faintly from another street. Mrs. Edgley sneezed into a handkerchief. Verity held very still. "You cannot be serious." "I am. Yesterday I was a trap. Yesterday I was wrong. That is a very swift education. Painful lessons often are." She almost smiled, but the hurt in her stopped it. "Do you ask because you respect me, or because Friday has frightened you?" He did not answer quickly. She was grateful for that. A quick answer would have been polished. She had no use for Polish. "Friday has forced me to act," he said at last. "It has not forced me to choose how. I could still refuse you and prepare for the consequences. I could allow society to believe whatever it wishes. Men in my position survive accusations better than women in yours. That, too, is part of the truth. A generous admission. A shameful one." His voice lowered. "If you refuse me, I will still put my name between yours and the lie. Mr. Vale will state that the letter was disputed. I will make it known that I do not believe you wrote it. Lady Prunella will not be permitted to use my silence as a weapon against you." Verity looked at him sharply. "Permitted? Forgive me. I mean I will not assist her by saying nothing." The correction was small. It mattered. She drew a slow breath. "And if I accept? Then the engagement will be formal, but its terms will be yours as well as mine. You will have a proper chaperone, a proper settlement, and the right to withdraw if we prove this arrangement was built on fraud. You will not be hurried to the altar to protect my pride. You will not be hidden to protect my comfort." His gaze dropped once more to the glove. "And you will not be handled by anyone as though your consent is a thread to be snapped." The words reached the torn seam at her wrist before they reached her heart. Verity looked away. She did not want him to see that they had struck. Across the square, Lady Prunella watched from the carriage with a stillness that betrayed more than movement would have done. If Verity returned to Dacre House unprotected, the attic room would shrink. The doors would close. Millie might suffer for the letter. The forged correspondence would remain in some hidden drawer, waiting to define her. If she accepted, she entered another kind of danger. A duke's protection could become a gilded cage if he mistook gratitude for obedience. "I will not be your shield," she said. "No, I will not smile while you save your estate and call it kindness. No, I will not marry contempt simply because it comes with a coronet." Adrian's eyes held hers. "You should not." The answer was too quiet to be performance. Verity felt the balance change. Not in his favor. In hers. For the first time since the half-closed door, a choice stood before her that did not belong wholly to someone else. "Then I will accept a formal engagement," she said. "For now. Not because I forgive you. Not because I trust you. Because someone used my name, and I mean to discover who it was. Something moved across his face that was almost relief, but he controlled it before it could become possession. Then we begin with truth. No, Your Grace. We begin with suspicion. Truth is what we are trying to earn. This time, he did not flinch. He bowed, lower than a man of his rank needed to bow in a public square. Then I shall earn what I can. Verity extended her hand because etiquette required some sign of agreement. He took it gently, his fingers closing only as much as propriety allowed. For one brief second, the mended glove rested in his grasp. The pearl button held. When they returned to Lady Prunella, the older woman's smile appeared ready before her eyes were. Well, she asked. Verity answered before Adrian could. His Grace has made an offer. I have accepted a formal engagement under terms to be settled by Mr. Vale. Lady Prunella stared. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Verity saw the calculation beneath the shock. A woman who had expected to manage a sacrifice had just discovered the sacrifice could speak. Adrian turned to Mr. Vale. Have notices prepared discreetly. No flourish. No gossip through servants. My card will be sent to Dacre House within the hour, and Lady Verity's name will not be discussed as though it requires apology. Mr. Vale bowed. Yes, Your Grace. By noon, the first carriage had stopped before Dacre House to ask whether the rumour was true. By 2 o'clock, 3 calling cards lay on Lady Prunella's silver tray from women who had ignored Verity for 2 years. By dusk, London knew the Duke of Hale-wick had asked before the Friday deadline, and Lady Verity Dacre had not been rescued like a fainting girl from a bad novel. She had listened. She had questioned. She had accepted with conditions. In her room beneath the roof, Verity removed the mended glove and placed it beside the letter she had not allowed fear to silence. Her hand trembled only after the door was locked. Tomorrow, society would decide whether she was fortunate, shameless, or dangerous. Tonight, she knew only one thing with certainty. The man who had once mistaken her for a trap had just opened the first door out of one. By Saturday afternoon, Lady Verity Dacre sat across from the Duke of Hale-wick in Mr. Gideon Vale's chambers at Lincoln's Inn and discovered that an engagement could feel less like romance than a hearing in which her life was evidence. The room was narrow, panelled in dark wood, and lined with shelves of calfskin volumes that seemed to have absorbed generations of secrets. A coal fire burned low behind a brass guard. Rain tapped at the window with patient fingers. On the table between them lay the instruments of respectable coercion, folded drafts, sealing wax, a silver penknife, 2 inkstands, and a sheet-headed marriage settlement in Mr. Vale's neat professional hand. Mrs. Edgley sat near the hearth with her knitting, awake enough to serve as chaperone and old enough to pretend not to hear what dignity required her to ignore. Lady Prunella had wished to attend. Adrian had refused with such polished finality that even she had found no graceful way to enter the carriage. That refusal should have comforted Verity. Instead, it reminded her that a duke could exclude one person as easily as he could protect another. Power was never gentle merely because it had turned in her direction. Mr. Vale adjusted his spectacles. Lady Verity, His Grace has instructed me to prepare terms that preserve your independence in the event the engagement is dissolved, delayed, or found to have been encouraged by fraudulent correspondence. Verity looked at Adrian. That is a remarkably careful way to say someone may have forged my name. Careful language survives courtrooms, Mr. Vale said. Plain language survives consciences, Verity replied. Across the table, Adrian's mouth tightened, not in displeasure. If anything, he looked as though the remark had confirmed some private judgment he had been trying not to make too soon. Then plain language, he said. Someone may have forged your name. I intend to know who. And until then, she asked. Until then, he said, no one will be permitted to profit from the uncertainty. Mr. Vale drew one paper forward. His Grace proposes a separate provision for your personal use. It would not be under Lady Prunella's control. It would remain yours whether the marriage proceeds or not. Verity kept her hands folded in her lap. She had worn the mended glove again, though Mrs. Pike had offered to find another pair from Lady Prunella's stores. The repaired seam lay hidden beneath her cuff, but she felt it whenever she moved. How much? Mr. Vale named the sum. It was not obscene by ducal standards. It was astonishing by hers. It represented warmth in winter, rent without begging, a maid's wages, a doctor called before illness became desperation, and the ability to leave a room without asking who owned the door. For one dangerous second, Verity saw safety. Then she saw Lady Prunella smile if she heard of it. She saw London's whispering mouths. She saw the Duke's earlier contempt, dressed now in benevolence. "No," she said. Mr. Vale paused with his pen above the page. Adrian leaned forward slightly. "Lady Verity." "No," she repeated. "If that money is written as compensation for injury, it makes my injury part of the bargain. If it is written as gratitude for silence, it purchases something I have not offered for sale. If it is written as kindness, it places me in debt to a man who has already misjudged me once." "Mrs." Edgeless needles clicked once, then stopped. Adrian looked at Verity for a long moment. "What would you accept?" The question was quiet. It was also the first useful one he had asked. "A provision held in trust by Mr. Vale for practical expenses connected to this engagement," she said. "Clothing suitable for public appearances, travel, correspondence, and the hiring of a companion if Mrs. Edgley tires of being dragged through my misfortunes. Nothing more. If the engagement ends, unused funds return to you." Mr. Vale blinked. Adrian did not. "And if you are forced from Dacre House because of this?" Verity's fingers pressed together. "Then we will write a separate clause stating that temporary residence will be arranged with Mrs. Edgley or another respectable female relation, not in any house of yours, and not under any arrangement that makes my reputation dependent upon your private generosity. You have thought this through. Women without money are required to think through doors before opening them." His gaze dropped briefly, as though the words had struck somewhere he could not defend. "Very well." Mr. Vale began writing. The scrape of the pen filled the room. It might have been a small sound, but to Verity it felt like the first hinge moving. "There are other terms," she said. Adrian looked up. "Name them." "First, you will not speak for me when I am present and capable of answering." "Agreed." "Second, you will not use me as a shield in any quarrel over Cressmere Hall. If this engagement is spoken of, it will not be described as a noble sacrifice you made for your tenants, your mother's memory, or your pride." His face changed at the mention of his mother, but he did not interrupt. "Agreed." "Third," Verity said, and found this one the hardest because it was least legal, "you will not behave as though your first opinion of me was a misunderstanding of no consequence." "I heard it. I remember it. If we are to stand in public together, you will not ask me to pretend the wound never existed because its existence inconveniences you." The fire made a low sound behind the guard. Mr. Vale examined the ink on his pen with unnecessary concentration. Mrs. Edgley resumed knitting, more slowly now. Adrian's eyes held Verity's. There was no anger in them, and that unsettled her more than anger would have done. "I won't ask you to pretend," he said. The contraction, spoken so simply, made him sound less like a title and more like a man. "And I won't forgive myself by borrowing your silence." Verity looked away first. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was a plank laid across dangerous water, and she was practical enough not to despise a plank because it was not yet a bridge. Mr. Vale turned another paper. "There remains the matter of the earlier letter." Adrian's stillness sharpened. "You found it?" "No, Your Grace. That is the difficulty. The original delivered to these chambers is missing from the file." Verity felt the room tilt by one invisible degree. "Missing?" "Removed," Mr. Vale said. "Misfiled is possible, but I do not favor comforting explanations when the inconvenient ones fit better. I have the copy made by my clerk. The original, with paper, seal, and hand, is gone." Adrian's voice cooled. "Who had access?" "Myself, my senior clerk, the messenger who carried the Dacre papers, Lady Prunella for a quarter of an hour when she called to inspect the trust draft, and, briefly, Lady Marybelle Voss, who accompanied her father on unrelated business and waited in the outer room." Verity remembered ivory satin, lifted glass, and a smile polished like a blade. "Lady Marybelle was here." "For less than 10 minutes, Mr. Vale said." "Long enough," Adrian said. Mr. Vale folded his hands. "Long enough for many things." Not long enough for proof. The word settled heavily. Verity understood then that truth would not simply arrive because the Duke had begun to desire it. Truth required paper, witnesses, timing, and the humiliating patience of people who had already suffered. Then we proceed carefully, she said. Adrian looked at her. We proceed together. Do not make it sound prettier than it is. Together can still be unpleasant. Despite herself, Verity almost smiled. Almost. The moment did not last. A knock came at the chamber door, and Mr. Vale's clerk entered with a salver bearing a freshly delivered note. His face showed the strained excitement of a young man trying not to enjoy bad news. Forgive me, sir. This was brought from Lady Amherst's house. It is already being copied in several drawing rooms. Mr. Vale opened the note, read it, and closed his eyes briefly. Adrian extended a hand. Give it to me. He read. His expression did not alter, but the air around him seemed to lower in temperature. Verity did not ask permission. She reached across the table, and after a pause he gave her the page. The words were not signed, but they did not need to be. London has seen many ambitious engagements, but rarely one so swift. Lady Verity Dacre appears to have sold her dignity at an excellent price. Beneath the elegant cruelty was the implication that her silence, her presence, even her acceptance of protection had a cost. Verity laid the paper down carefully. Lady Marybelle's voice seemed to rise from it, bright and poisonous. There it is, she said. The first bill for being believed. Adrian stood. I will answer this. Verity rose too. No, he turned to her. Lady Verity, I cannot allow that insult to pass. You will not answer before I decide whether it deserves one. His brows drew together. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Your first condition. I nearly broke it within an hour. Yes. Then decide. The room waited. Verity thought of Lady Prunella, of Marybelle, of every woman who had smiled while measuring how little she could afford to lose. We do not answer gossip with outrage, she said. We answer it with an appearance so correct that they must sharpen their knives in public to cut it. Adrian's eyes held a flicker of reluctant admiration. Cressmere Hall, he said. A house party under proper chaperonage. My aunt can preside. Mr. Vale may attend with the papers. Society will see you treated as my future Duchess, not as a woman hidden under accusation. Verity heard the danger in it at once. A country house could protect a woman or trap her, depending on who controlled the doors. And Lady Marybelle, she asked. Adrian's jaw tightened. She has already been invited by my aunt. Then let her come. He studied her. Are you certain? Verity picked up the unsigned note and folded it once, then again. Her hands did not tremble. No. But I am finished being discussed only in rooms where I am absent. By sunset, Adrian's formal card had been delivered to Dacre House, Mr. Vale's revised terms had been locked in his case, and invitations to Cressmere Hall began moving through London with all the quiet force of a challenge. In her attic room that night, Verity placed the folded gossip note beneath the mended glove on her desk. One paper had lied about her. Another had mocked her. Somewhere, the first letter was missing. Somewhere, the hand that had written it was still moving freely through drawing rooms, touching glasses, lifting fans, and waiting for her to stumble. Verity looked at the glove and fastened its repaired pearl button with care. If society wanted a spectacle, it would have one. But this time, she intended to stand close enough to see who smiled when the knife appeared. Cressmere Hall appeared at the end of a 3-mile avenue of beeches, grey against a low Hampshire sky, and Lady Verity Dacre understood at once why a man might mistake a house for everything. It did not rise prettily from the land. It commanded it. Broad stone steps climbed to a portico darkened by age. Long windows reflected the pale afternoon. Beyond the house, parkland rolled toward a line of bare-limbed oaks, and the distant roofs of tenant cottages showed through a veil of mist. Verity sat inside the Hale-wick carriage with Mrs. Edgeley opposite her and a folded rug over her knees, feeling the repaired seam of her glove pull faintly whenever her fingers moved. She had expected grandeur. She had not expected sorrow. Cressmere did not look like a prize waiting to be seized. It looked like a place that remembered being loved. Beside the front steps, Adrian Ellsbury waited with his hat in his hand, though rain gathered in the air and a duke could have allowed servants to receive her. Behind him stood a line of household staff, arranged with the solemn dignity of people who knew their wages, cottages, and futures might depend upon troubles carried in by their betters. Lady Prunella had not accompanied them. She had claimed a headache too severe for travel and sent instead 3 letters of instruction, all of which Mrs. Edgeley had placed beneath her knitting without reading aloud. A wise woman, Mrs. Edgeley had said, never begins a journey by obeying paper. When the carriage door opened, Adrian stepped forward. He offered his hand, then stopped a fraction short, waiting. Verity noticed. So did the footman. So, she suspected, did every servant on the steps. She placed her gloved hand in his, not because she had forgotten the injury between them, but because arriving without accepting the courtesy would create a scandal before the first trunk had been carried in. His grip was steady and light. Lady Verity, he said, his voice low enough that it did not perform for the household. Welcome to Cressmere. Thank you, Your Grace. She looked past him to the stone facade. It is larger than I imagined. Most obligations are. That was almost humor, but not quite. He turned with her toward the assembled staff. Mrs. Calder, this is Lady Verity Dacre, my betrothed guest. During her stay, she is to be treated with every respect due to a future Duchess of Hale-wick. Any request she makes regarding comfort, correspondence, or household information is to be considered as coming with my approval, unless propriety requires Mrs. Edgeley's presence. The housekeeper, a tall woman with silver threaded through dark hair, curtsied. Her eyes were sharp, not unfriendly. Lady Verity, we're honored to receive you. The contraction made the formal words unexpectedly human. Verity inclined her head. Thank you, Mrs. Calder. I hope not to trouble the household. Mrs. Calder's gaze flicked, very briefly, toward Adrian. Trouble has already arrived in other forms, my lady. You needn't apologize for being named near it. The words were spoken so softly that only those nearest could hear. Adrian's expression did not change, but Verity sensed his attention sharpen. He had wanted the staff to respect her. He had not expected them to protect her dignity before he did. Inside, Cressmere smelled of beeswax, old books, extinguished fires, and lavender stored in linen presses. Portraits watched from panelled walls. Some faces were proud. Some were tired. One woman, painted in blue beside a window with a book in her lap, held Verity's gaze longer than the rest. Adrian paused beneath it. My mother, he said. Verity looked from the portrait to him. The same dark eyes. The same controlled mouth, though the painted woman's expression held warmth he had trained out of his. She loved this place. More than London. More than any room where people performed affection for advantage. He seemed to hear the bitterness in his own voice and closed it away. Mrs. Calder will show you upstairs. Mrs. Edgeley has the east bedchamber adjoining yours. You will not be isolated here. The promise was practical. It was also carefully chosen. Verity heard in it the memory of an attic room, a closed door, and a woman ordered not to write. I am glad to know the walls are not expected to keep me obedient. His eyes met hers. No wall in this house has that instruction. Before she could answer, a footman approached with a leather-bound ledger tucked under one arm. Forgive me, Your Grace. Mr. Phelps sent this from the steward's room. He said the charity subscriptions could not wait, since Lady Prunella's corrections changed the totals. Verity turned at the name. Adrian took the ledger, but did not open it at once. Lady Prunella's corrections. Yes, Your Grace. To the parish coal fund and the widow's allotment. The footman looked uneasy. Mr. Phelps said the account was copied from papers sent through Dacre House. Verity felt the room narrow. Dacre House. Charity pages. The blue account book that had carried her letter to Mr. Vale. Adrian looked at her, and this time he did not hide the question in his eyes. Would you care to see the steward's room after you have rested? He asked. I would care to see it before rest teaches me hesitation. Mrs. Edgeley sighed behind them. Then I shall rest for both of us and pretend it is chaperonage. Within the hour, Verity sat at a long table in the steward's room with Adrian across from her, Mrs. Calder near the door, and Mr. Phelps, the steward, arranging papers with the anxious precision of a man who feared ink more than weather. It was not a romantic room. It had shelves of rent rolls, maps, subscription lists, and a strong-box blackened by years of handling. Yet to Verity, it felt more honest than most drawing rooms. Numbers rarely flattered. They revealed where people placed their care. Here, Mr. Phelps said, touching a column. The widow's allotment was reduced by £12. The coal fund by £8. The difference is marked as transferred to a special improvement subscription at Lady Prunella's recommendation. Adrian leaned forward. What improvement? That is the point, Your Grace. None is specified. Verity drew the ledger closer, careful not to smudge the ink. The handwriting in the corrected column was not Mr. Phelps's. It was too elegant, too decorative, and its loops curved with a faintly familiar vanity. Her pulse changed. This is not Lady Prunella's hand. Adrian looked at her. Are you certain? I copied her notes often enough to know the shape of her displeasure. The corner of Adrian's mouth moved, but he did not smile fully. Then whose? Verity traced the air above the page without touching it. I do not know. But the hand likes to be admired. Mr. Phelps frowned. There is more. The special subscription was acknowledged by Locksfield House. Adrian's eyes hardened. The Earl of Locksfield. Lady Maribel's father, Verity said. The name seemed to settle into the ledger like a stain. Not proof. Not enough. But enough to darken the path ahead. Adrian closed the book with care. Mr. Phelps, no further corrections from outside Cresme are to be entered without my review. Mrs. Calder, Lady Verity is to have access to these ledgers with Mrs. Edgley or yourself present. Mrs. Calder curtsied. Yes, Your Grace. Verity glanced at him. You remember the condition. I remembered nearly failing it. When evening settled, the house party had not yet begun, and Cresme held a fragile quiet before invasion. Verity found the gallery by accident, or perhaps because every old house guided new sorrows toward portraits. A fire burned at one end. Rain tapped along the windows. She stood again before the portrait of Adrian's mother, wondering what kind of woman wrote trust clauses that could become weapons after death. Footsteps approached. She did not turn. Mrs. Edgley is in the morning room, Adrian said from several feet behind her. The door is open. Mrs. Calder is within sight at the stair. I won't risk your reputation for an apology. Verity looked over her shoulder. That is a remarkably formal beginning. I am learning where formality is useful. He came no closer. I owe you words that are not surrounded by solicitors, witnesses, or people hoping to profit from them. You have already apologized. No. I admitted error. That was not enough. The rain softened against the glass. Verity waited. Adrian looked at the portrait, then at her. When I said what I said at Dacre House, I thought I was defending my mother's house from a scheme. I was also defending my pride. I mistook injury to my control for injury to my honor. Then I saw you hear cruelty without using it. I read your letter. I watched you stand in a room that wanted to make you small. And still, I let you bear the weight of my first judgment longer than you deserved. Verity's fingers curled inside the mended glove. Why tell me this now? Because if I only protect you in public, you may believe I am repairing a reputation. I am trying to repair a wrong. The words were simple. They did not ask her to weep over them. That made them harder to dismiss. Some wrongs cannot be repaired by the person who caused them, she said. I know. Do you? I am beginning to. She studied him, this man with an estate people wanted, a mother's memory guarded like a wound, and a conscience that seemed to resent waking but would not return to sleep. Beginning is not completion. No, his gaze dropped to her wrist, then returned at once to her face, as if he had caught himself looking at evidence when he should have been looking at the woman. But if you permit it, I will continue. Verity did not forgive him. She did not move closer. Yet something inside her, held tight since the half-closed door, eased by a single breath. Then continue by finding the truth. With you, he said. Beside me, she corrected. A faint, grave warmth touched his eyes. Beside you. Before either could say more, wheels sounded on the gravel below, sharp against the rain. They turned toward the window in time to see a carriage draw up before the entrance. A footman hurried out. The door opened, and Lady Marybelle Voss descended in ivory travelling silk, one hand holding a red-sealed envelope as though it were an invitation and a weapon at once. Verity felt the quiet of Cresmere change. Adrian's face closed into ducal stillness. It appears, she said, your house party has begun. Lady Marybelle looked up toward the lit gallery windows and smiled as if she already knew where to aim. By the second evening of the Cresmere house party, Lady Verity Dacre understood that a dinner table could be arranged like a battlefield without moving a single chair. The great dining room had been dressed for dignity. Silver branches held steady flames along the long mahogany table. Crystal caught the candlelight and returned it in cold flashes. The portraits of Hale-wick ancestors looked down from dark walls with the solemn disapproval of people who had caused scandals and then forbidden their descendants to speak of them. Adrian sat at the head of the table, composed in black evening dress, with his aunt, the Dowager Lady Aylesbury, on his right and an elderly marquis on his left. Verity had been placed halfway down the table, far enough from Adrian to satisfy propriety, near enough for everyone to remember why she was there. Mrs. Edgley sat within a respectable distance, armed with a lorgnette and a suspicion of everyone under 60. Lady Marybelle Voss sat opposite Verity in pale rose silk, a colour chosen to look innocent under candlelight. At her place lay the red-sealed envelope she had carried from London, now tucked half beneath her fan as though forgotten. Nothing about Lady Marybelle was ever forgotten by accident. The first two courses passed with excellent manners and poisonous restraint. A gentleman spoke of roads washed out by rain. A lady praised the musicians expected for the next evening. Lady Marybelle asked Mrs. Calder's nephew, seated as a courtesy because he managed estate correspondence, whether country households ever confused the handwriting of one lady for another. The young man flushed and answered that he could not say. Verity lowered her spoon. Across the table, Marybelle's eyes met hers for the briefest moment, then drifted away in feigned boredom. Adrian noticed. Verity saw him notice. That should have steadied her. Instead, it made the room feel smaller. Protection was not the same as belief. A fish course was removed. Wine was poured. Conversation softened into that dangerous space where society became hungry for something sharper than food. Lady Marybelle opened her fan. Your Grace, she said lightly, I hope you will forgive a question from an anxious friend of the family. Adrian looked at her. That depends upon the question. How grave? I almost regret asking. She did not regret it. Everyone could hear that she did not. It concerns rumor, naturally. I am told there was some confusion over a letter, and that the confusion has made your engagement more romantic to certain people than it might otherwise appear. The Dowager Lady Aylesbury set down her glass. Lady Marybelle, confusion rarely improves when served with sauce. A few guests smiled. Marybelle accepted the correction with a sweet tilt of the head. Quite true. Yet confusion can be cruel to the innocent. I would never wish Lady Verity to suffer beneath misunderstanding. Verity felt Mrs. Edgley stiffen beside her. Adrian's hand remained still near his glass. Then do not encourage one, he said. It was a warning, quiet but clear. Marybelle lowered her eyes. I wouldn't dream of it. Only, a copy came into my possession. Not the original, of course. A copy. And I hesitated to mention it, because it seemed so indelicate. But if someone is falsely accused, surely the fastest mercy is clarity. She drew the red-sealed paper from beneath her fan. The room changed. Conversation did not stop all at once. It died in corners. One voice faded near the sideboard. A fork touched porcelain too sharply. Verity looked at Adrian. His gaze had fixed upon the envelope. Something in his face closed, not against her, perhaps, but against surprise. That was the first cut. Lady Marybelle, he said, you will put that away. Of course, if Lady Verity wishes it. Marybelle turned toward Verity with shining concern. I shouldn't like to distress her. It was perfectly done. If Verity refused, she looked afraid of evidence. If she allowed it, she became a spectacle. She rested her gloved hands in her lap, one over the other. If you have brought a fossor to dinner, Lady Marybelle, it is your manners that should be distressed. A breath moved around the table. Marybelle smiled, but the paper trembled slightly between her fingers. Then let us hope it is not false. She unfolded the copy and read in a voice trained for pianoforte songs and social wounds. I mean to secure the Duke before Friday. His Grace values Cressmere above pride, and men who love property can be taught to mistake surrender for honor. The word struck the room like a dropped lamp. Verity did not move. She did not trust her body to obey her. That sentence was cleverer than the first forged letter Adrian had described. Colder. Closer. It sounded like something a person could believe an intelligent woman might write if they already wished to despise her. Marybelle continued, softer now. If he resists, the clause will do what beauty cannot. By Friday, he will ask, or he will lose what his mother left him. The dowager drew a sharp breath. Mr. Phelps, seated near the lower end, stared at his plate. Mrs. Edgley whispered, vipers have become very literate. Verity looked at Adrian again. She needed nothing grand from him. Not a defense shouted across the table. Not a theatrical declaration. Only the smallest immediate certainty. His eyes met hers. Then his gaze dropped to the page in Marybelle's hand. He knew handwriting mattered. He knew forged words could imitate truth closely enough to wound. He knew the earlier letter had vanished. He knew all of that. Yet he hesitated. It lasted no more than 3 heartbeats. It lasted long enough. In those 3 heartbeats, every candle seemed to lean toward Verity. Every guest watched to see whether the Duke believed his future Duchess or the paper read against her. Adrian said, this is not the place. Not this is false. Not Lady Verity did not write it. Not enough. Verity pushed back her chair. The sound was soft, but the room heard it as if it had cracked the table. Lady Marybelle's lashes lifted. Lady Verity, please don't be distressed. No one here wishes to judge you unfairly. Verity stood. Her knees felt distant, but her voice belonged to her. No, Lady Marybelle. Judgment is precisely what this table was invited to enjoy. Adrian rose at once. Lady Verity. She looked at him, and the pain in her face made his expression change. Too late. I will not sit as entertainment for people who have already chosen their verdict. The words entered the silence and remained there. No one laughed. No one rescued the moment with music or wit. Verity turned to the dowager and curtsied because she would not let humiliation rob her of manners. My lady, forgive me for withdrawing before the ladies leave the table. I find I have no appetite for letters read in place of truth. Mrs. Edgley rose with surprising speed. Nor have I. At my age, digestion is a treasure, and malice ruins it. Adrian stepped away from his chair, but Verity had already moved toward the door. She did not run. She would not give them that. She passed behind the footman, past the gleam of silver, past Lady Marybelle's still smile, and out into the corridor where the cooler air struck her face like mercy. Only when the dining room door closed behind her did she allow one hand to touch the wall. Mrs. Edgley joined her a moment later. My dear, if you wish to faint, do it now. I shall say the carpet attacked you. Verity almost laughed. It came out as a breath. I do not faint. Good. It gives the wicked too much satisfaction. Footsteps sounded behind them. Adrian came into the corridor, pale beneath his restraint. Lady Verity, I was wrong to pause. Yes. The answer stopped him more effectively than anger. I did not believe her, he said. You wondered whether you should. I wondered how the hand could look so close to yours. And that wonder was given a place at the table before I was. He took the words as if each one had weight. Let me make it right. Not tonight. Verity. It was the first time he had used her name without her title. It might have mattered in another moment. In this one, it only hurt. No, Your Grace. Do not make intimacy from injury. He went still. Mrs. Edgley looked away, which was kinder than silence. Verity gathered herself. If you wish to help, remain downstairs and learn who enjoyed the performance most. I am going to my room with a chaperone, while I still have the dignity to leave on my own feet. Adrian bowed his head, once. As you wish. She wanted him to argue. She wanted him not to. Both desires shamed her. She turned away before either could show. Upstairs, in the bedchamber assigned to her, firelight trembled along the pale wallpaper. Mrs. Edgley rang for warm water and then stationed herself near the door like a general disguised in lace. Verity removed her glove slowly. The right one came free. The left resisted at the repaired wrist. She tugged with care, then stopped. One pearl button was gone. For a moment she simply stared at the empty loop of thread. The room drew close around her. That button had been there when she dressed for dinner. She was certain of it. She had fastened it herself before the mirror, pressing it through the loop while telling her reflection that cloth and courage could both be mended. Now the thread hung bare. Mrs. Edgley came to her side. What is it? Verity laid the glove flat upon the dressing table. The missing pearl left a small, accusing space at the wrist. Downstairs, beneath candlelight and painted ancestors, a forged letter had spoken in her name. Somewhere in Cressmere Hall, someone had taken a piece of the glove first torn at Dacre House. Verity looked at the empty loop until hurt became something colder and more useful. The dinner was not the attack, she said quietly. It was the cover. Mrs. Edgley's face hardened. For what? Verity touched the bare thread. For someone to take proof before I knew it mattered. The missing pearl button changed the shape of the night. Until Verity saw the bare loop of thread at her wrist, the dinner had been a humiliation, sharp and public, but still something she knew how to endure. A woman could survive a cruel room if she kept her spine straight and her voice steady. A stolen button was different. It meant the accusation had fingers. It meant someone had come close enough to touch what had first been damaged at Dacre House, then waited for the perfect moment to turn that damage into proof against her. Mrs. Edgley sent the maid away with the untouched warm water and locked the bedchamber door as though old brass could defend them from clever malice. Say it again, she said, standing beside the dressing table with her shawl pulled around her shoulders. Verity looked down at the glove lying flat beneath the candlelight. The button was fastened before dinner. I remember because the loop caught, and I had to press the pearl through with my thumbnail. Could it have fallen under the table? Perhaps. Verity touched the loose thread. But if it merely fell, why did Lady Marybelle choose tonight to read a letter that spoke so closely to the first lie? Why arrange a spectacle at the exact moment a piece of my glove vanished? Mrs. Edgley's face, usually arranged for comic complaint, became severe. Then we do not sleep. No, Verity lifted the glove and folded it once, carefully. We look before the house wakes with new stories. A soft knock came at the dressing-room door, not the main corridor door. Mrs. Edgley raised her brows. Verity crossed the room and opened it only a few inches. Milly stood in the narrow passage beyond, holding a folded linen cloth and wearing the frightened expression of a girl who had crossed a line and knew she could not uncross it. My lady, she whispered, Mrs. Calder said I might serve you while you're here, since her lady's maid has a fever. I heard about the dinner. I didn't mean to listen, but downstairs they're saying all manner of things, and I thought you should know something. Verity opened the door wider. Come in. Milly slipped inside and curtsied to Mrs. Edgley, who locked the door again. What did you hear? Verity asked. Milly looked at the glove in her hand, then quickly away. It isn't what I heard. It's what I saw before we left London. The morning after her ladyship tore your glove, I was sent to clear the passage outside the drawing-room. There was a pearl button on the runner. I thought it was yours, so I picked it up, but Lady Prunella came from the morning-room and asked what I had in my hand. When I showed her, she said, that belongs to Lady Verity's mending, and took it. Verity felt the floor seem to settle under her feet, hard and cold. Why did you not tell me? Milly's eyes filled. She said if I spoke of it, she'd say I stole from you. I wanted to tell you at Dacre House, but then the letter went, and everything happened so quickly. I'm sorry. I know I should have been braver. No, Verity said at once. You should have been safer. Those are not always the same thing. Milly swallowed and nodded, though the shame did not leave her face. Mrs. Edgley leaned over the glove. Then there may be 2 buttons in play. One taken after the first tear, and one missing tonight. Or one taken before, Verity said, and another taken to make it look as if I planted the first. The thought moved through the room like a draft. It was ugly. It also fit. Verity reached for her shawl. Milly, did Lady Prunella send any writing papers with the trunks? A dispatch box, my lady. It was carried to the small writing room near the east stair. Mrs. Calder said it had come under Lady Prunella's seal, but Lady Marybelle asked after it when she arrived. She said there were songs inside for the music-hall. Mrs. Edgley made a sound of contempt. Songs. How musical forgery has become. Verity took the candle. Her hand was steady now. Hurt had burned too hot to hold, then cooled into purpose. We go there. At this hour. Milly whispered. With a chaperone, Verity said. With a candle. And with no apology. The writing room near the east stair was small, meant for house guests who wished to send polite lies before breakfast. Its desk stood beneath a narrow window, and the air smelled of paper, rosewood, and faint sealing wax. Mrs. Edgley stationed herself in the open doorway, where any passing servant would see propriety before suspicion. Milly lit the branch of candles. Verity went first to the blotting pad. She had copied enough letters under Lady Prunella's roof to know that ink told secrets long after words were gone. The top sheet showed nothing. The second held faint impressions. Milly brought the candle closer. Verity tilted the blotting paper toward the light. Reversed shadows appeared, broken but legible in places. Secure. Friday. Cresme. Beauty cannot. Her breath caught. Not proof enough for a court. Enough for the blood. That is from the letter, Mrs. Edgley said quietly. The one read at dinner. Or from the draft before it, Verity answered. She checked the edge of the page. Near the corner lay a small smear of red wax, flattened into the fibers. Lady Marybelle's envelope was sealed in red. Milly pointed to the drawer. There are wafers there, my lady. Verity opened it and found common wafers, 2 penknives, and a small packet of sealing wax. Red. She did not touch it. Leave it as it is. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Mrs. Edgley straightened. Adrian appeared at the doorway, still in evening dress, his face drawn with the restraint of a man who had not allowed himself anger because anger would have been easier than remorse. He took in the scene at once. Mrs. Edgley in the doorway. Milly by the candles. Verity at the desk with the blotting paper under her hand. The glove folded beside it. I was told you had left your chamber, he said. By whom? Verity asked. Mrs. Calder. She was concerned. She also said you were properly accompanied. Mrs. Edgley lifted her chin. I am more proper at midnight than half your guests are at noon. Adrian bowed slightly to her, then looked at Verity. I came to apologize. This is an inconvenient hour for apologies. I know. His gaze moved to the blotting paper. He did not step inside. May I ask what you found? Verity's first instinct was to shield the evidence from him. The instinct hurt because it was sensible. He saw that too. You may ask, she said. You may not take over. He went still. No, you may not summon men to search rooms while I am treated as the cause of disturbance. No, you may not decide that because you are sorry, you are now entitled to lead. His face tightened, but he did not defend himself. No, the third answer softened something in her, though she refused to show it. She lifted the blotting paper. Words from the letter read tonight are impressed here. The paper was used in this room. Milly saw Lady Prunella take a pearl button from the passage after my glove was first torn. Another button vanished from my glove during dinner. Adrian's gaze sharpened at Milly, then gentled when the girl shrank. You're not in danger from me, he said. Not for telling the truth. Milly looked uncertain, but she did not step back. Verity noticed that he did not ask her to repeat herself like a servant under examination. He looked instead to Verity. "What do you need?" The question was simple. It changed the room. No command. No plan thrust into her hands like another form of control. Verity looked down at the blotting paper, at the red wax, at the glove. "I need Mrs. Calder to know no one is to clean this room until Mr. Vale sees it. I need Millie protected from dismissal or accusation. I need every person who entered this room since Lady Marybelle's arrival named, but quietly. And I need you not to look at me again as you looked at that letter at dinner." His face paled slightly. "I can't undo that pause. No, I can make certain it does not become my habit. That is not a promise. That is a beginning." He bowed his head. "Then tell me where to stand." The words were low. They carried no ducal command at all. For the first time since Cressmere had opened its doors, Verity allowed herself to believe that he might understand the difference between rescue and respect. She handed him nothing. She merely pointed to the doorway beside Mrs. Edgley. "There. Where everyone can see you are not blocking me." Adrian moved to the place she indicated. Mrs. Edgley gave him one approving glance, which from her was nearly a coronation. Millie exhaled. Verity returned the blotting paper to the desk and covered it with a clean sheet so no careless draught would disturb it. Outside, the house slept badly. Somewhere beneath the same roof, Lady Marybelle smiled over the damage she believed she had done, and Lady Prunella's old hand, whether in London or by letter, still reached into Verity's life. But the next move would not belong only to them. Verity picked up the torn glove and folded it over the missing buttonhole. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin with names." Adrian stood in the doorway exactly where she had placed him. "Then tomorrow, we begin beside you." This time, she did not correct him. Morning at Cressmere Hall did not bring peace. It brought lists. Mrs. Calder produced the names of every servant, guest, maid, footman, and visiting attendant who had entered the East writing room since Lady Marybelle Voss arrived. Mr. Phelps added times beside them in a careful hand. Millie, pale but resolute, confirmed which trunks had come from Dacre House and which dispatch box had carried Lady Prunella's seal. Adrian stood at the edge of the steward's room while Verity read each name, exactly where she had asked him to stand the night before. He did not interrupt. He did not reach for the papers. He watched the evidence gather around her, and for once his power remained still until it was needed. The restraint should not have moved her. It did. By noon, the house party had divided itself into factions without admitting it. In the drawing room, Lady Marybelle played a bright little air at the pianoforte while two young ladies admired the delicacy of her touch. In the library, the Dowager Lady Aylesbury received guests with a politeness so cold that 3 conversations died before they could become gossip. In the servants' hall, Mrs. Calder quietly changed the locks on the small writing room and ordered that no waste paper be burned. Verity spent the day in a modest sitting room with Mrs. Edgley, comparing the impression on the blotting paper with the copied letter. The same words appeared. Secure. Friday. Cressmere. Beauty cannot. Not enough for public justice, but enough to prove that the attack had been drafted under Adrian's roof. That knowledge made the house feel less like refuge and more like a stage whose curtains had not yet risen. Near 4 o'clock, Adrian came to the sitting-room door and waited until Mrs. Edgley nodded permission. "Mr. Vale has arrived from London," he said. "He brought news." Verity set down the magnifying glass Mrs. Calder had found in the steward's cabinet. Good news rarely arrives in a solicitor's case. No, the single word held too much. Mrs. Edgley rose with a sigh. "I shall sit near the open door and pretend not to listen, which is the foundation of respectable English chaperonage." Adrian waited until she had settled herself with her knitting. Then he placed a folded paper on the small table before Verity. "Mr. Vale has found the debt ledger between Lady Prunella and the Voss family. It is not complete, but it is enough to show a connection." Verity opened the paper. The entries were dry, abbreviated, and devastating. Advances. Notes renewed. Payment deferred. Loxfield. Dacre. Prunella. The amounts were not large enough to purchase a dukedom, because dukedoms were not bought in ledgers. They were large enough to purchase fear. Lady Prunella owes them, she said. Yes. And if you marry me under a cloud, she may still profit by controlling whatever remains of my settlement. Unless the fraud is proved. Verity looked up. And if it is not? Adrian did not sit until she gestured toward the chair across from her. Even then, he seemed to carry the weight of Cresmere in his shoulders. If it is not, the Dacre trustees can still challenge the trust. They can claim I acted under disputed circumstances. They can argue that my engagement was coerced by a clause and tainted by deception. They cannot take my title, and they cannot strip me of every estate, but they can drag Cresmere into chancery for years. Rents may be tied. Improvements delayed. Tenants frightened. My mother's name discussed by men who never knew her and never cared for the land. Verity heard what he did not say as clearly as what he did. Cresmere was not everything, but it was the thing that had taught him what everything felt like. She folded the paper. Why did you not tell me the full danger before? Because I did not want you to think I had asked for your hand only to save stone walls and rent rolls. Did you? He absorbed the question without offense. At first, I asked because you were being wronged and I had helped wrong you. I also knew the engagement would protect Cresmere. I will not pretend otherwise. Convenient honesty. Necessary honesty. She stood and went to the window. The park beyond the glass was washed in late winter light, all muted greens and grey branches. Farther off, a tenant boy drove sheep across a slope with a stick in one hand and his cap in the other. The land lived while aristocrats arranged their papers. When you look at me, she asked, do you see a woman, or the last door before ruin? The room went very quiet. Mrs. Edgeless Needles stopped. Adrian rose, but he did not come closer. I used to see danger, he said. Then I saw injury. Then courage. Now I see the woman I should have seen before anyone put my estate between us. Verity closed her eyes once. Words like that were dangerous because they did not sound polished. They sounded earned, but not enough. Not yet. If I ask to end this engagement today, what happens? I send you to Mrs. Edgeless' house under proper protection. I instruct Mr. Vale to state that the disputed letter is under examination. I publicly deny believing any charge against you. I face Cresmere afterward. She turned back to him. And if Cresmere is lost? His expression shifted. Pain, controlled and old, crossed his face. Then it is lost without my using you as a lock on the door. Something in Verity's chest loosened and ached at the same time. She had expected argument. Men often spoke of sacrifice most loudly when they intended others to make it. Adrian did not speak loudly. That was worse. It made belief possible. You would truly let the challenge come. I would rather fight for Cresmere honestly than keep it by allowing your name to be dragged through mud I helped spread. The memory of his pause at dinner stood between them. He saw it too. I failed you last night, he said. Not because I believed her. Because I let the room think I might. I don't ask you to forget that. Good. I cannot. I know. She looked down at the glove folded beside the blotting paper. The empty buttonhole was turned inward now, hidden from the room. Private protection will not be enough. No, if we continue, the truth must be chosen in public. Not hinted. Not managed. Not made comfortable for the people who enjoyed doubting me. His gaze did not waver. Then we choose it in public. Even if it costs you more than Friday did. Especially then. The words settled gently, and because they did not demand an answer, they came nearer to her than persuasion could have. For one moment, Verity imagined what it would be like to believe him completely. The thought frightened her more than Maribel's letter. Suspicion protected. Hope opened doors. A knock at the open door spared her from answering the feeling. Mr. Vale entered with travelling dust on his coat and a square envelope in his hand. He bowed to Mrs. Edgeley, then to Verity. Forgive the interruption. This arrived for Lady Verity by express from London. It was sent first to Dacre House, then forwarded here by Lady Prunella's clerk. Verity took it. The paper was heavy. The handwriting on the direction was elegant and deliberately feminine. Adrian's eyes narrowed. May I? Verity held the envelope a moment longer. No. It is addressed to me. His expression changed, not with offense, but acknowledgement. Of course. She broke the seal. A card slipped out, bordered in silver. Lady Maribel Voss requested the honour of Lady Verity Dacre's presence at a London musical in 3 nights' time, where, the note added in a smaller hand, all misunderstandings might be settled before those most concerned. Beneath the line was a faint red smear of wax, like a smile made of bloodless colour. Mrs. Edgley made a noise of disgust. That girl invites people as if she were loading pistols. She wants London, Verity said. Cressmere is not enough. Adrian's face had gone still. You do not have to attend. Verity looked at the invitation again. If she refused, Maribel would call it fear. If Adrian answered alone, Verity would become again what she had been at the half-closed door. A woman spoken of elsewhere. Yes, she said. I do. Adrian stepped closer by 1 pace, then stopped himself. Then I go with you. Beside me, she said. Not in front. Beside you. Mr. Vale cleared his throat. Then I shall bring the ledger, the copy of the forged letter, and the blotting paper under seal. Bring Patience as well, Mrs. Edgley said. The wicked are rarely considerate enough to confess before supper. Verity almost smiled. She folded the invitation and placed it atop the debt ledger. The 2 papers looked harmless together. They were not. One proved motive. One promised attack. Between them stood a duke learning to lower his pride, a poor relation learning to use her voice, and a truth that would not survive being whispered. That evening, as trunks were prepared for the return to London, Verity stood alone for a moment in the gallery beneath the portrait of Adrian's mother. She did not pray. She had learned that society often mistook prayer for waiting, and she was finished waiting. When Adrian appeared at the far end of the gallery, he did not approach until she looked at him. The carriage leaves at 8, he said. Mrs. Edgley has insisted on bringing smelling salts, 3 shawls, and a moral hatred of Lady Maribel. All useful. A faint warmth touched his mouth. Then it faded. Are you afraid? Yes. He nodded, accepting that courage and fear could occupy the same breath. So am I. That surprised her. For Cressmere? For you. The answer was quiet. It did not ask to be rewarded. Verity turned back to the portrait before he could see too much in her face. Then be afraid honestly. It will make you careful. Downstairs, servants carried sealed cases and cloaks through the hall. Outside, the road to London waited under a sky the colour of pewter. Lady Maribel had chosen her stage. Lady Prunella had left fingerprints in ledgers and silence. And Verity, who had once stood outside a door and heard her worth dismissed, was going back to London to speak where everyone could hear. Lady Maribel Voss had chosen a London drawing-room rather than a ballroom, and that made the cruelty more intimate. A ballroom could hide malice beneath music, movement, and too many chandeliers. Lady Loxfield's drawing-room in Grosvenor Square offered no such mercy. It was arranged for listening. Chairs curved in polite half-circles toward the pianoforte. Small gilt tables held glasses of ratafia and plates of sugared almonds no one seemed to touch. Candles burned in clusters before mirrored panels, multiplying every face until Verity felt watched by twice the number of guests. The invitation had promised music. The room had prepared for judgment. Verity entered on Mrs. Edgley's arm with Adrian a few steps behind her, exactly where she had asked him to be. Not ahead. Not shielding her from sight as if she were a thing to be smuggled through society. Beside her when the doorway required it, behind her when her own name was announced. Lady Verity Dacre. The murmur that followed was soft enough to be denied. It moved through the room like a silk hem over dust. She wore the same pale blue gown she had worn at Lady Immersed Assembly, altered at the cuff so the mended glove could be plainly seen if anyone cared to look. She had considered a new pair. Then she had rejected the thought. The world had already made a weapon of that torn seam. She would not help it by hiding the evidence of having survived. Lady Maribel stood near the pianoforte in silver gauze, luminous and composed. Beside her, Lady Prunella Dacre held a fan of black lace and wore the faint, sorrowing expression of a guardian burdened by an ungrateful charge. Seeing her there was no surprise. It still tightened the air in Verity's chest. Lady Prunella should have been at Dacre House nursing the headache that had kept her from Cresmere. Instead, she had recovered in time to attend a musicale designed around Verity's disgrace. "My dear child," Lady Prunella said, coming forward with both hands extended. "How pale you look. I feared the country air had been too much for you." Verity dipped a curtsy without allowing the older woman to touch her. "On the contrary, It was clarifying." Lady Prunella's smile did not move. "We must hope London proves equally so." Adrian bowed to Lady Loxfield, then to the assembled guests. Mr. Vale had arrived separately with a sealed leather case and now stood near the wall, plain, watchful, and easy to underestimate. Mrs. Edgley settled herself in a chair near Verity, her lorgnette ready in one hand like a small weapon made acceptable by age. The first song began. A soprano with a nervous throat sang an Italian aria while the room pretended to be interested in sorrow that had been set to music instead of the sorrow standing beside Mrs. Edgley's chair. Verity listened. She made herself breathe with the rhythm of the song. She saw Lady Marybelle glance once at Lady Prunella, then at a young gentleman near the pianoforte holding a folded paper. The signal was small. It was enough. When the applause came, Lady Marybelle stepped forward before the next piece could begin. "Dear friends," she said, all warmth and shining concern, "music has a way of lifting difficult feelings into the air, where they may be seen without vulgarity. Yet before we continue, I feel we owe kindness to those who have lately suffered from rumour." Mrs. Edgley muttered, "Kindness has put on a very expensive gown tonight." Verity did not move. Adrian took one step closer, then stopped himself. She noticed. So did Marybelle. "There has been," Marybelle continued, "a most painful uncertainty regarding a letter. No one wishes to accuse. No one wishes to wound. But uncertainty wounds everyone. It wounds His Grace. It wounds families of standing. It wounds Lady Verity most of all, if indeed she has been misunderstood." She turned toward the young gentleman. "Mr. Anstruther, if you would be so good." The gentleman flushed with the importance of being useful in a scandal. He unfolded the paper. Adrian's voice cut across the room before the first word could be read. "If that paper concerns Lady Verity, it will not be read as entertainment." The room stilled. Lady Marybelle widened her eyes. "Your Grace, entertainment is the last thing I intend." Then you chose a curious number of witnesses. A few faces turned away. Lady Prunella stepped in softly. "Adrian, surely openness is best. If my niece has nothing to fear, she should welcome clarity." Verity felt the old trap close around the word welcome. She could refuse and appear guilty. She could submit and become the evening's sacrifice. She lifted her hand slightly. Adrian looked at her at once. "Let me speak first," she said. His jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. "Of course." The simple surrender of the floor steadied her more than any defense could have done. Verity turned to Mr. Anstruther. "You may read it, sir." "Slowly, if you please. I should like every person present to hear not only the words, but the confidence with which they were placed in my mouth." The gentleman looked less pleased now. He cleared his throat and read. "I mean to secure the Duke before Friday. His Grace values Cresmere above pride, and men who love property can be taught to mistake surrender for honour. If beauty cannot compel him, necessity will. By Friday, he will ask, or he will lose what his mother left him." The words fell one by one. They were the same as at Cresmere, but a second hearing did not dull them. It polished them into something more dangerous. Verity saw two matrons exchange glances. She saw Lady Loxfield press her lips together, perhaps regretting the room she had offered her daughter. She saw Mr. Vale's hand rest on the case that held the blotting paper. Most of all, she saw Lady Marybelle watching not the reader, not Adrian, but Verity's left glove. That decided her. Verity stepped forward. Not far. Just enough to leave the shelter of Mrs. Edgley's chair. "Lady Marybelle," she said, "may I ask when this copy first came into your possession?" Marybelle's smile was delicate. Recently. I couldn't say the exact hour. How unfortunate. Exact hours have become rather important. Have they? Very. Verity lifted her left hand. The repaired seam was visible beneath the candlelight. The empty place where one pearl button had vanished was hidden under the fold of her wrist, but she knew it was there. You are fond of clarity, are you not? When it serves truth. Then perhaps you will help me understand something. The room leaned toward them without moving. Verity kept her voice calm because trembling would be remembered more eagerly than logic. If I wrote that letter, why does it describe a glove button I had already lost before the ink was dry? Silence. Not a polite thinning of conversation. Not a social pause. Silence. Mr. Anstruther looked down at the paper as if a new sentence might appear and rescue him. Lady Marybelle's smile held for 1 second too long. Lady Prunella's fan stopped moving. Adrian's gaze went from Verity's glove to Marybelle's face, and the restraint in him sharpened into something colder than anger. I beg your pardon, Marybelle said. The letter says nothing of a glove. No, Verity replied. But the draft does. A murmur broke out, then died when Adrian looked across the room. Verity continued. The same words read aloud tonight were found impressed upon blotting paper in the East Writing Room at Cresmere Hall. Near that paper was red wax matching the seal used upon Lady Marybelle's envelope. At dinner, while the first copy was read, a pearl button vanished from my glove. Before that, another pearl button from the same glove had been taken at Dacre House after the glove was torn. Lady Prunella's voice slid in. My dear, this is becoming fanciful. You're overwrought. Verity turned to her. I have been called many things in the past week. Overwrought is merely the one used when the truth begins inconveniencing people. A faint sound moved through the room. It might have been approval. It might have been shock. Verity did not need to know. Lady Prunella's eyes hardened. You forget yourself. No. I am remembering myself in public. Adrian stepped beside her then, not before her. Mr. Vale, he said, you will state what you examined. Mr. Vale came forward, opened the case, and removed a sealed sheet. I examined the blotting paper taken from the Cresmere Writing Room. The impressions correspond with the language read tonight. I also examined the copy previously presented in my chambers. The hand differs from Lady Verity's confirmed letter of refusal. Refusal. Lady Loxfield repeated before she could stop herself. That word changed more faces than Verity expected. A woman who had refused a duke was harder to paint as a huntress of titles. Adrian's voice remained even. Lady Verity wrote to release me from obligation before I asked for her hand. That letter is in Mr. Vale's possession. Lady Marybelle's colour rose. How touching! But none of this proves who wrote the other. No, Verity said. It proves only that someone did. And that the person wished this room to accept my guilt before anyone asked how the evidence arrived. Lady Prunella closed her fan. Enough. This discussion demeans us all. It has demeaned Lady Verity long enough, Adrian said. His tone was quiet, but every title in the room seemed to hear the Duke in it. No further accusation will be made against her without examination. Lady Marybelle curtsied, low and graceful, but her eye shone with rage. Then let examination continue. The music never resumed properly. People spoke in careful clusters, weighing which direction power had begun to turn. Within 15 minutes, Lady Loxfield pleaded a headache and the evening ended by degrees. As guests moved toward the hall, Lady Prunella drew close enough to Verity that her perfume, violets and something bitter, reached her first. You are proud of yourself, she murmured. No, Verity said. I am tired of being useful to liars. Lady Prunella's smile was very small. Then I hope your little maid is less tired. Servants have been dismissed for missing trinkets before. Pearl buttons, for example. If this vulgar inquiry continues, London may soon hear that Millie stole what you now call evidence, perhaps at your instruction. Verity went still. Adrian was speaking to Mr. Vale near the door, not close enough to hear. Lady Prunella touched her arm with two gloved fingers, light as dust. "Be careful, my dear. Poor girls are so easily ruined. And unlike dukes, they do not have houses to retreat to." She moved away before Verity could answer. The hall seemed suddenly colder. Across the room, Adrian turned and saw her face change. He came toward her at once, but Verity barely heard his question. The attack had failed to silence her? So they had chosen someone with less protection. Milly. Verity looked at the staircase where Lady Prunella had disappeared, and the victory of the drawing-room became something fragile and unfinished in her hands. By the time Adrian reached Verity in Lady Loxfield's hall, she had already learned the cost of speaking aloud. It was not her own name they threatened next. It was Milly's. That was the refinement of Lady Prunella's cruelty, to strike not at the woman who could now stand beside a duke, but at the girl who still carried folded linen, lowered her eyes before rank, and depended upon a character written by the very people who might destroy her. Verity told Adrian in the carriage with Mrs. Edgley seated opposite them and Mr. Vale's leather case wedged beneath his feet. The London lamps slid across the windows in brief gold bars. Adrian did not interrupt. He listened as Verity repeated Lady Prunella's words exactly, the threat beneath them, the pearl buttons, the implication that Milly could be named a thief or made to appear a servant acting under Verity's instruction. When she finished, the carriage seemed to hold its breath. Adrian's face had become still in the way marble was still, but Verity had learned by now that his stillness was not emptiness. It was restraint under pressure. "She threatened a maid to silence you," he said. "She threatened a maid because she knows I will not allow Milly to be sacrificed." "No," he said quietly. "You will not. Nor will I." Verity looked at him through the dim carriage light. "Do not say that if you mean only to remove her quietly and call it mercy." "I do not. Milly needs more than wages from a generous duke. If they put theft on her name, she will carry it longer than any of us carry scandal. She cannot retreat to an estate. She cannot sit out a season. A servant's reputation is bread." Adrian bowed his head once, as if accepting a correction that should never have been needed. "Then we protect the bread as well as the name." Mrs. Edgley gave a grim little nod. "At last, a sentence worth the wheels that brought us here." By morning, the counterattack had arrived. A note, unsigned but delivered through a footman who had once served at Dacre House, claimed that a maid in Lady Verity's service had been seen with a pearl button and had boasted of helping her mistress create evidence. The phrasing was too polished for the servant it pretended to quote. The accusation was not strong enough to prove anything. It was strong enough to ruin a girl if repeated by the right mouths. Milly stood in the breakfast parlour of the quiet house Adrian had taken in Brook Street for the duration of the inquiry, twisting her apron until Mrs. Calder gently took both her hands and made them still. "I didn't steal it," Milly whispered. "I know," Verity said. "And I won't let them say you did." Milly's eyes filled. "My lady, if you defend me, they'll say it's because I helped you. Then they will have to accuse us both in a room where we may answer." Adrian entered with Mr. Vale behind him. His expression told Verity there was more. "Lord Loxfield's man has sent word," he said. "If I press the matter against Lady Marybelle or Lady Prunella without what he calls proper restraint, he will support a petition over Cresmere's trust. He threatens years in Chancery." Mrs. Edgley clicked her tongue. "Ah. The law. So often a broom for sweeping wickedness into a respectable corner." Mr. Vale looked pained, perhaps because he could not deny it. Verity felt the old fear try to return. Not for herself alone, but for the tenant she had seen from Cresmere's windows, for Adrian's mother's portrait, for the house that had begun as a symbol of his pride and become, against her will, something she understood. "Years?" she asked. "Possibly," Adrian said. "Expensive years. Public years. Then choose carefully." He met her eyes. "I have." "You have not heard what I am asking." "Yes, I have. You are asking whether I will still stand with you and Milly when the cost is no longer theoretical." The room went quiet. Milly looked between them as if she could not believe she belonged in the same sentence as a duke's estate. Adrian turned to her. "Milly, no accusation will be answered in a kitchen or corridor. You will be heard with witnesses, and no one under my roof will dismiss you or mark your character because powerful people find your truth inconvenient. Milly tried to curtsy and nearly failed. Your Grace, I don't know how to speak before gentlefolk. Verity went to her. You will speak as you spoke to me. Simply. That is harder to defeat than cleverness. Mr. Vale opened his case and withdrew a folded ledger sheet. The timing may now favour us. I have obtained a clearer copy of the debt entries between Lady Prunella and the Voss family. It shows a note renewed 3 weeks before the first disputed letter arrived at my chambers, and another promise of payment contingent upon the Cressmere trusteeship being challenged. Adrian took the paper but handed it to Verity before reading it fully. That small act changed the air. He had evidence in his hand and gave her first claim upon it because the accusation had been made through her name. She read the entries. They were dry enough to bore anyone who did not understand desperation. To Verity, they read like motive. Lady Prunella had owed money. Lady Marybelle had wanted a duchess's place. Lord Loxfield had wanted leverage over Cressmere. A forged letter had offered all three a path. This is not enough alone, she said. No, Mr. Vale replied. But with the blotting paper, the missing original, the red wax, Milly's testimony, and the glove, it becomes a pattern. Adrian looked toward the window. Beyond it, morning callers were already beginning their slow assault upon Brook Street. London wanted a conclusion. It would accept a lie if it came wrapped elegantly enough. Then we do not wait for drawing rooms to invent one, he said. We gather witnesses. My aunt. Lady Immersed. Lady Loxfield if she has the courage to see what her daughter has made of her hospitality. 2 matrons whose invitations matter. Mr. Vale. Mrs. Calder. Milly, if she consents. Milly swallowed. Verity touched her arm. You may refuse. No, my lady. The girl's voice shook, then steadied. If I stay silent, they can put any words they like in my mouth. They've done it to you already. Verity felt the sentence enter her like a promise and a wound. Then we go together. Adrian's gaze moved to her. There was something in it she had not allowed herself to name, because naming a feeling before justice was finished felt like setting flowers on an unmarked grave. I would ask you something, he said, then stopped. She knew what he almost asked. The question was there between them, fuller than gratitude, more dangerous than apology. Her heart answered before her judgment could prevent it, and for that reason she spoke first. Ask me when truth no longer needs me silent. His breath changed. Only once. Then he bowed his head. I will. By late afternoon, the formal meeting was arranged for the following evening at Lady Immersed's drawing room, neutral enough to satisfy propriety and visible enough to make retreat difficult. Cards went out under Adrian's name and his aunt's. Mr. Vale sealed the ledger sheet, the blotting paper, and the copies in separate packets. Mrs. Calder wrote a list of household access in her firm hand. Milly practiced saying, I saw Lady Prunella take the pearl button, until her voice stopped breaking on Lady Prunella's name. Verity watched it all with a calm that did not feel like peace. It felt like the still moment before a door opened onto a room full of people who had already decided whether they wanted truth or comfort. That evening, as dusk gathered over Brook Street, Adrian found Verity in the small front parlour with the torn glove laid on a square of white linen. The missing buttonhole looked almost delicate now, as if damage had learned refinement. You do not have to attend tomorrow, he said. That is not protection. No. It is fear speaking before I have tamed it. She looked up. For Cressmere? For you. This time, the answer did not surprise her. It only hurt gently. Then stand where I can see you. Not where you can hide me. Beside you. Beside Milly too. Yes. The next evening, Lady Immersed's drawing room filled slowly with people who had come to witness correction while pretending they had come to preserve decency. The curtains were drawn, the lamps lit, the chairs placed with careful neutrality. Mr. Vale stood near a writing table with his packets. The Dowager Lady Aylesbury sat upright near the fire, every inch of her posture a warning. Milly stood behind Verity, pale but present. Adrian stood to Verity's left, not touching her, not speaking for her, a dark steady line of authority at her side. The door opened just as Mr. Vale reached for the first seal. Lady Mary Belvos entered in white silk, her mother behind her, and in her gloved hand she carried Verity's remaining glove as though it were a trophy brought back from war. The room fell silent before anyone said a word. Lady Mary Belvos paused in the doorway long enough for every person in Lady Amherst's drawing-room to see what she carried. The glove lay across her palm like a captured thing, pale kid leather with pearl buttons at the wrist, unmistakably Verity's, and yet made strange by the triumph with which it was displayed. No one spoke. Even the fire seemed to settle lower behind the grate. Lady Amherst stood near the tea table, one hand pressed to the back of a chair. The Dowager Lady Aylesbury watched from beside the hearth with a stillness colder than disapproval. Mr. Vale stood by the writing table, his sealed packets waiting beneath the lamplight. Milly's breathing quickened behind Verity, and Adrian, beside her, did not move forward. He had promised. He would not stand between her and the room unless she asked. Lady Marybelle curtsied first to Lady Amherst, then to Adrian, then smiled at Verity with the radiant pity of a woman who had prepared her expression before entering. "Forgive the intrusion," she said. "I feared this little inquiry might proceed without the most useful object." Verity looked at the glove. Her own left hand rested bare inside the folds of her shawl. The torn glove with the missing buttonhole lay on the linen square before Mr. Vale. The one in Marybelle's hand was its mate, the glove Verity had left in her chamber at Cressmere after the dinner scandal. "Where did you find it?" Verity asked. Marybelle's smile softened. "In a place one does not expect to find a lady's glove. Near a servant's trunk." Milly made a small sound. Verity did not turn, though every instinct in her wanted to shield the girl from the room. "Near whose trunk?" Adrian asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of rank. "I believe," Marybelle said, "near Milly's." Lady Prunella entered behind Lady Loxfield with perfect timing, her black fan closed in both hands. "How wretched," she murmured. "I warned you, my dear." Servants, when encouraged beyond their place, often misunderstand loyalty. Milly stepped forward before anyone could tell her not to. Her face was white, but her voice held. "I didn't take it. I never touched her ladyship's gloves except to fold them when asked." Lady Prunella sighed. "Poor child. Panic makes liars of the simple." Verity felt Adrian shift beside her. Not forward. Only enough that she knew the effort restraint cost him. She looked at Mr. Vale. "May the glove be placed on the table?" Mr. Vale bowed. "If Lady Marybelle consents." "Gladly," Marybelle said, and laid it down with care. Truth has nothing to fear from inspection. "Then it has a rare advantage over gossip," Mrs. Edgeley muttered. A few eyes flickered, but no one smiled. Mr. Vale opened the linen square and placed the second glove beside the first. The room leaned inward. The pair looked innocent together, almost tender. Then he turned each wrist toward the lamplight. One glove showed the repaired tear, the empty thread where a pearl button had disappeared. The other bore all its buttons, but near the inner seam a faint smear of red wax clung to the stitching. Mr. Vale bent closer. This wax was not there when Lady Verity's belongings were first examined at Cressmere. Marybelle's colour did not change. Gloves passed through many hands in a household. "Indeed," Mr. Vale said. "That is why hands matter." He opened the first packet and removed the blotting paper from the Cressmere writing room. "These impressions correspond to the words read at Lady Loxfield's musicale." The paper was found in the room where Lady Prunella's dispatch box had been placed and where Lady Marybelle was seen inquiring after music. Lady Loxfield stiffened. "My daughter asked after songs." "She may have," Mr. Vale said. "The blotting paper remembers other compositions." A low murmur stirred and died. Lady Prunella opened her fan. "This is absurdly theatrical. A smear of wax, a servant's tale, and a gentleman of the law pretending parlour shadows are evidence." Verity looked at her. "Then let us have the servant's tale plainly." She turned to Milly. "Only what you saw." "Nothing more." Milly swallowed. "After the glove tour at Dacre House, I found a pearl button on the passage runner. Lady Prunella came out and took it from me. She said it belonged to Lady Verity's mending. Did I ask you to take it? Verity asked. No, my lady. Did I ask you to hide it? No. Did I ask you to say anything untrue? Millie's chin lifted. No. You told me not to risk my place for you. That sentence moved through the room more powerfully than tears. Lady Amherst looked down. The dowager's gaze softened for the first time. Adrian's hand closed once at his side. Lady Prunella's fan snapped shut. A touching performance. One wonders who rehearsed her. Fear did, Verity said. You gave her enough of it. Lady Prunella's eyes flashed, but Mr. Vale was already opening the second packet. There remains the matter of motive. These entries, copied from the Dacre debt ledger, show that Lady Prunella owed considerable sums to Lord Loxfield. A note was renewed 3 weeks before the first disputed letter reached my chambers. A further memorandum refers to advantage upon challenge of the Cresmere Trust. Business between families, Lady Prunella said. Not a crime. Perhaps not by itself, Mr. Vale replied. But combined with the vanished original letter, the copied hand, the Cresmere blotting paper, the red wax, and the pearl button, it forms a pattern no prudent person should ignore. Adrian stepped forward then, not before Verity, but beside the table where all could see him clearly. There is one more matter. His voice was measured, but Verity heard the strain beneath it. Before this began, I judged Lady Verity by a lie placed before me. I spoke of her as though she were a danger to my estate and beneath my respect. I was wrong. I was not merely mistaken in private. I gave my rank to a falsehood by allowing it to shape my conduct. The room held still. Verity felt every eye move between them. Adrian looked not at the matrons, not at Lady Marybelle, not at his aunt, but at Verity. I cannot unsay what she heard. I can only say here, before those who witnessed the result, that Lady Verity Dacre sought no advantage from me. She wrote to release me from obligation before I had the courage to deserve her trust. Whatever disgrace belongs to that first judgment belongs to me. Lady Prunella turned pale with anger. Marybelle's composure faltered. It was small, but it was enough. The Dowager Lady Aylesbury rose. Lady Prunella, until this matter is formally reviewed, you will cease to act in any capacity touching Lady Verity's interests. I will not receive you while a servant under your influence is threatened for telling the truth. Lady Amherst added, quietly but clearly, nor will I. Another matron near the window inclined her head. Nor I. Lady Loxfield looked at her daughter as though seeing not scandal, but consequence arriving in a gown of her own choosing. Marybelle, she whispered. Marybelle lifted her chin. This proves nothing final. It proves enough for tonight, Adrian said. Mr. Vale will proceed with formal notice regarding the forged correspondence and the attempted injury to Lady Verity's name. Lord Loxfield may answer through proper channels, not through drawing-room ambush. Marybelle's eyes glistened, not with remorse, but with the fury of a woman who had expected society to admire the knife because the handle was jeweled. Lady Prunella drew herself up. You will regret humiliating family before strangers, Verity. Verity looked at her guardian, at the woman who had taught her that dependence meant silence, who had torn a glove and nearly ruined a maid rather than surrender control. No, she said. I regret that I mistook endurance for duty for so long. Lady Prunella had no answer that would not reveal too much. That was the first true victory of the evening. The meeting dissolved slowly after that, not in triumph but in recalculation. Invitations would be withdrawn. Calls would be delayed. Doors that had opened to Lady Marybelle's beauty would now open more narrowly. Millie was led to a chair by Mrs. Calder, who had arrived with the household list and now placed a firm hand on the girl's shoulder as if establishing protection before the room could forget. Mr. Vale sealed the evidence again. Lady Amherst ordered tea no one drank. Only when the worst of the witnesses had gone did Adrian turn to Verity. The 2 gloves still lay on the table between them, one torn, one stained. I have asked once because Friday made cowards honest, he said softly. I ask now because truth has made me honest without force. Verity, I don't want your hand to save Cresmere, repair gossip, or quiet my guilt. I want the right to stand beside the woman I failed, the woman I respect, and the woman I love, if she'll allow me to spend my life proving those words in conduct." Her breath caught. Not because she had never imagined the words, but because she had imagined them too soon and punished herself for it. "You choose truth before pride?" she asked. "Yes. Even when truth does not flatter you. Especially then." Verity looked at Milly, safe for the moment. At Mr. Vale's sealed packets. At the Dowager, watching with fierce approval. At the gloves that had carried humiliation into proof. Then she looked at Adrian, no longer the man behind the half-closed door, not fully absolved, but changed by the cost of becoming worthy. "Then I will marry you," she said. "Not because you rescued me. Because when it mattered most, you finally let me stand and chose not to look away." Adrian bowed his head over her hand, not kissing it, not claiming a public tenderness that might embarrass her, only holding it for one reverent second. Around them, the drawing-room remained quiet. This time, the silence did not diminish her. It made room. 3 months after the drawing-room fell silent for the right reason, Verity returned to Cresmere Hall as Duchess of Hale-wick and found the house no longer looked like a thing to be won. It looked like home waiting to learn her footsteps. The avenue of beeches had changed since her first arrival. Their branches held new leaves now, small and bright against a softened spring sky, and the park beyond the windows had shed its grey severity for clean green slopes and lambs scattered like dropped wool across the fields. The carriage slowed before the portico, and Verity saw the staff gathered on the steps just as they had been that first day, but nothing in their faces felt watchful now. Mrs. Calder stood at the front in black silk with a white cap so crisp it might have been folded from dignity itself. Mr. Phelps waited beside her, solemn and relieved. Milly stood one step behind the housekeeper, no longer shrinking into herself, her apron immaculate, her eyes shining with a nervous pride that made Verity's heart tighten. Adrian sat beside Verity in the carriage, one hand resting near hers but not over it, because he had learned that nearness could be offered without being claimed. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "No," Verity said, looking at the house. "But I am willing." A faint smile touched his mouth. "That has always been more impressive." The footman opened the carriage door. Adrian descended first, then offered his hand. Verity placed her gloved fingers in his and stepped down onto the gravel drive. This time, no calculation waited beneath the courtesy. No hidden letter. No watching enemy with a red-sealed envelope. Lady Prunella had retired to a cousin in Bath after Mr. Vale's formal notice cut through the last of her authority, and the small income left to her was now supervised so closely that even her complaints required accounting. Lady Marybelle Voss had not been ruined in any vulgar theatrical sense, because society rarely punished its favourites all at once. But invitations thinned. Matrimonial hopes withdrew behind polite excuses. Her father's lawyers answered Mr. Vale's letters with increasing humility. Most importantly, no one in London now spoke Lady Verity's name as though it belonged to a scandal. They spoke it carefully. Some did so with admiration. Others did so with resentment. Verity had learned not to require the difference to be corrected. Respect sometimes began as caution before it became truth. Mrs. Calder curtsied deeply. "Your Grace. Welcome home." The words passed through Verity with more force than applause could have done. Your Grace. Not poor relation. Not unfortunate girl. Not useful niece. Not the woman a duke had been forced to marry. The Duchess of Hale-wick. She inclined her head, and her voice remained steady because she had practiced steadiness long before happiness made it difficult. "Thank you, Mrs. Calder. I am glad to be home." Milly's smile trembled. Verity turned to her. "And you, Milly? Have you found your new duties unbearable?" Milly curtsied, still shy but no longer frightened. "No, Your Grace. Mrs. Calder says I have a head for linen and a memory for keys." Mrs. Calder's mouth softened. "Both rarer than they sound." Adrian looked toward the open doors. "Then Cresmere is fortunate." Milly looked at him as if she still could not quite believe a duke spoke to her as someone whose future mattered. Verity saw it, and so did Adrian. That was the quiet difference now. He saw. The wedding had taken place that morning in the estate chapel, with only those whose presence carried peace rather than performance. The Dowager Lady Aylesbury had wept once and denied it twice. Mrs. Edgley had declared the ceremony tolerable because nobody fainted and the vicar did not mumble. Mr. Vale had stood near the back with the grave satisfaction of a man whose papers had finally served justice rather than confusion. There had been no crush of London guests, no hungry whispers, no display arranged to prove that Verity had been chosen. She no longer needed a roomful of witnesses to believe it. After luncheon, Adrian led her not to the great drawing-room, where callers would one day be received, but to a smaller chamber overlooking the east lawn. The room had been changed since her first stay. The heavy desk that once belonged to a steward had been moved near the window, polished until the walnut glowed. On it rested fresh paper, a sand shaker, 2 inkstands, and a small silver key. Beside the blotter lay a stack of new calling cards engraved with Duchess of Hale-wick in clean black script. Verity stood in the doorway. "What is this?" Adrian did not step in before her. "Yours, if you like it. Not a gift meant to flatter. A room where no one may forbid your letters, examine your papers, or tell you that your thoughts require permission before they leave the house." She crossed to the desk slowly. Her hand touched the silver key. Such a small object. Such an enormous correction. "And if I fill it with troublesome correspondence? Then I shall make certain there is enough sealing wax." She laughed softly, and the sound surprised them both. It was not the laugh she used for drawing rooms. It had no armor in it. "You may regret encouraging me. I regret discouraging you far more." The answer settled between them, tender because it did not ask to be forgiven again. Some apologies became weaker with repetition. Adrian's had become stronger by becoming conduct. On the desk lay another paper, written in Mr. Vale's hand. Verity read the heading and turned to Adrian. "A fund? A modest one to begin. For daughters of impoverished gentle families. Education, safe lodging, apprenticeship where appropriate, a companion's wage when required. No girl should have to choose between silence and shelter because a relation controls the roof." Verity looked down until the words blurred. She thought of her attic room at Dacre House, of Milly's fear, of the coal dust on Lady Prunella's hem, of all the little economies by which women's lives were narrowed before anyone called it cruelty. "This was your idea? The money was mine. The understanding was yours." She turned to him. "Do not make me too noble." I was angry. "Good," he said. Anger found the door. Compassion decided who else should pass through it. Later, when the household quieted and the first evening as husband and wife settled gently over Cressmere, they walked through the gallery where his mother's portrait watched the rain-bright park. Verity wore a gown of soft ivory muslin, simple enough for comfort, fine enough that Lady Prunella would have called it an extravagance if she had still possessed the power to make beauty feel guilty. Adrian stopped before the portrait. "I used to think keeping this house meant never yielding. And now?" He looked at her. "Now I think I nearly lost its meaning because I was afraid of losing its walls." Verity followed his gaze to the painted Duchess, the woman whose trust had become a battlefield through the hands of the living. "You did not lose everything." "No," his voice changed. "I lost pride. I found honor rather late. Late is not the same as never." He turned toward her. "Do you believe that?" She considered him, this man who had wounded her, stood beside her, humbled himself before the same society that had expected him to command, and now offered keys instead of cages. "I believe people become trustworthy in the moments after apology, not during it." He accepted that with the seriousness it deserved. "Then I will keep becoming so." In the small glass case on the table beneath his mother's portrait lay the torn pearl-button glove. Verity had chosen its place herself. Not hidden in a drawer. Not displayed like a relic of suffering. Placed where truth could be remembered without being worshipped. One button was missing. Another had been restored, not perfectly, but honestly. Beside the case, Adrian had set the first of her new calling cards. Duchess of Hale-wick. Verity looked at the two objects together and felt the old wound answer the new name without bitterness. The glove proved she had been held. The card proved she had not remained so. Adrian stood beside her, near enough that their shoulders almost touched, far enough that the choice to close the distance remained hers. Verity took his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers, then at her face, and the guarded man she had first seen across candlelit room seemed very far away. "Home?" he asked. Verity looked once more at the glove, the card, the portrait, the rain-softened glass, and the man who had learned that love was not rescue unless it made room for freedom. "Yes," she said. "Home."